we could make £50,000 cash all yours. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
TikTok chefs, Instagram chefs, that they put children off or young people off of cooking because it's so expertly done they can't do it. No, my young lad, he's 17, he is amazing in the kitchen. Oh, he is. He's amazing in the kitchen. And he gets it all off TikTok. He comes down, he can put burgers, wraps, stews, curries, sauces, and the smells in the kitchen. I said, where'd you get these? Oh, just TikTok, I'm trying it out. And it's just amazing the things that he can conjure up. So for some people, it might be... it's an inspiration for him. So they're saying that it's intimidation. For my boy, it's an inspiration. They say it's entertainment. For my boy, it's an infomercial. I watch him doing his stuff. At that stage, I could do baked beans on toast and knock up a salad. That was it. But my boy can do all sorts of stuff.
It makes it accessible as well, doesn't it? Because lots of people say, like, you need an education to be in the kitchen, or you need to go find yourself loads of cookbooks. But you don't.
No.
You go on your phone now.
Well, I mean, like, all the spices, sesame oil. I mean, I'm amazed at the stuff that he does. So it's encouraging. All you just need is a kitchen well-stocked and have a go. And understand that failure is actually the route to learning. I mean, he's made mistakes, he's stuck stuff in the bin, but that young man, I am amazed at some of the stuff he does.
I don't mind cooking at all. It's cleaning up that I have the problem with. Dawn, let's talk about sex.
Can I just say there are things called restaurants, by the way? Just put that one. My hell, I don't even know where the kitchen is.
OK.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Very, very good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting for you live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer's anti-corruption minister was forced to resign over corruption allegations. Yet at PMQs today, Kemi Badenoch failed to nail Starmer and instead attacked him on the economy on the day that inflation went down. Does Badenoch have the bite, or do the Tories need a leader who go for the kill? And a group called Great British Political Action Committee has slammed Labour's plan to surrender the Chagos Islands and pay Mauritius an eye-watering £9 billion for the privilege. It slammed it as reckless and short-sighted. Now, this little-known group includes members Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Baroness Kate Hoey, who joins me today in the studio. And Jerry Adams could be in line for a British taxpayer-funded payout because of Sir Keir Starmer's human rights plans. Well, today the Prime Minister appeared to do a U-turn on the issue. On today's show, I'll speak to the son of a Belfast police officer who was murdered by the IRA. And that's all coming in your next hour. Has Kemi Badenoch got the bite to be a leader of the opposition? A few weeks ago, 500 tractors were outside Whitehall. She didn't even mention them at PMQ. She could hear them inside. A deafening cacophony of angry farmers simply ignored. Today, Tulip Siddiq was put aside, resigned because of corruption charges. The anti-corruption minister following Louise Haigh, who of course got the boot over a fraud allegation. 2 ministers gone too sweet. Instead, Kemi Badenoch went on the offensive on the economy. Well, inflation went down today. Are they living in a bubble? Have they got the teeth? Have they got what it takes to be the leader of the opposition? Let me know your thoughts. And the usual way to do that is gbnews.com/your say. But before we kick off the show, it's your headlines. And here's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you. 2 minutes past 3, the top story this hour. Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch clashed over the UK's economy at Prime Minister's questions earlier, following speculation over the Chancellor's abilities. Despite an unexpected drop in inflation to 2.5% in December, the Tory leader criticised the government over the economic situation and asked if Labour will rule out any further tax rises this year.
His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises this year? Yeah.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer said this is due to a £22 billion black hole left by the Conservative government. The Prime Minister then went on to pledge his commitment to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, but he stopped short of guaranteeing no more tax hikes.
We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole that they left. The Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them. And Mr. Speaker, if we all thought the politics was about cheap points, I could criticise their chancellors, but I don't have enough time to go through all of the chancellors that they had. We have one budget, that's what we're committed to, strong fiscal rules, and we'll stick to them, unlike the party opposite.
In other news, the UK says it will not sign off a deal to relinquish control of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius until Donald Trump's new US administration is installed. That indication from Downing Street this afternoon. It comes after reports the Mauritian government is seeking further talks, with the country's Attorney General travelling to London today. But a Number 10 spokesperson has said we will only agree to a deal that is in the UK's best interest and protect our national security. Well, it comes after Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer agreed a deal with the previous Mauritian government to give away the Indian Ocean islands, which had been British for 200 years. And Sir Keir Starmer has said he is looking at every conceivable way to stop former Troubles prisoners such as Gerry Adams from seeking compensation. The Prime Minister was responding to criticism of the government's proposed repeal of legislation that had put a stop to such civil claims. The current law blocks his claim for compensation over his detention in prison in the 1970s for suspected involvement in terrorism. But the repeal plan will reverse that. It's after the Northern Irish High Court ruled that the legislation was incompatible with human rights laws. 2 teenagers have been arrested on suspicion of murdering a 14-year-old boy who was stabbed to death on a double-decker bus in south-east London. Kellyan Bokassa was pronounced dead shortly after being attacked in Woolwich on the 7th of January. Those 2 boys, aged 15 and 16, were arrested on Wednesday, and a 44-year-old woman was also arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. All 3 remain in custody. And the death of a 2-year-old boy after a medical episode at a children's nursery is being investigated by police. Merseyside Force said the incident was reported at the Early Learners Day nursery just after 12:30 yesterday afternoon. The boy was taken to hospital by paramedics but sadly died, and his family is now being supported. An investigation has been launched to establish the full circumstances and the cause of the young boy's death. Mark Chapman, Kelly Cates and Gabby Logan have all been confirmed as the next presenters of the BBC's football highlights programme Match of the Day. It's after it was announced last year that the current host of the BBC's flagship sports show, Gary Lineker, of course, will step down at the end of the season. The former England striker has presented the show since 1999. And when the trio take over as hosts, it will be the first time the role's been shared by 3 people. And Linda Nolan has died at the age of 65 after several years of battling cancer. The Irish star was part of the family group The Nolans, which included her sisters Colleen, Maureen, Bernie, Denise and Anne. She died peacefully in hospital this morning, confirmed by her agent earlier today. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Now, though, it's over to Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Sorry, we're just arguing about Nottingham Forest and Liverpool here in the studio. Let's get back to politics. Now, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, today missed a wide, gaping, open goal, a bit like Liverpool last night. Well, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer's anti-corruption minister was forced to resign over corruption allegations, and yet at PMQs today, Kemi Badenoch decided to lead her main attack lines on the economy on the day that inflation finally went down. So today's big question is this: does Badenoch have the bite, or do the Tories need a leader who go for the kill? Well, I'm joined in the studio now by GB News political editor Chris Hope and the political editor at HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield. Gentlemen, let's not argue about football anymore. Let's get back to the politics. Seriously, I was on the show yesterday. You and I broke the story. Tudip Siddiq forced out, the anti-corruption minister forced out.
Resigned is what happened. But
Tomatoes. The fact of the matter is, it was over corruption. Wow, this is an attack line. Louise Haigh, of course, forced out, resigned, tomatoes over that fraud allegation. 2 ministers fallen already. This is the moment Kemi Badenoch can get them on "you promised change and yet you're more of the same old rot." Instead, Chris, she went on the economy on the day inflation was the first piece of good news Rachel Reeves has had this side of Christmas. I think she missed a complete open goal. A fish was in a barrel waiting to be shot. Do you think Kemi Badenoch has the teeth, or is she simply not up to the job?
I think she did quite well today. I think that she's on the back foot. The polls are looking pretty bad. Looking at that YouGov poll we had earlier this week, the first poll since the election by YouGov, Labour dropping 9 points. That grabbed the headlines. But I was struck by Tories down 22 points. The benefit being Reform UK and up 10 points, double-digit increase. Lib Dems up 1. I think she's on the back foot over Reform, Nigel Farage, ever since Boxing Day. A mistimed attack on those membership numbers that was apparently wrong, according to those who have seen the books of Reform UK. They haven't pushed back on that. I think we're waiting for Kemi Badenoch to come out fighting as the voice of the right. That space is controlled by Reform UK. That's a mistake. She's been half asleep, I think, over Christmas and hasn't really got much better. I thought she did quite well. The question on the Chagos Islands, why pay billions to surrender something that's already ours, is a key question on this Chagos deal, now being delayed until after Donald Trump takes power next year. I think she went across the kind of all the stories of the past week in terms of front pages. She went on Jerry Adams, who got a human rights lawyer in the PM to say, we'll look at every conceivable way to stop these cases like his claiming damages. Of course, he might get money back because of UK human rights laws for being in prison back in the 70s. And it's finally on the economy. Any more tax rises planned for this year? He couldn't say that. The OBR comes back on the 26th. I thought she came out fighting for her.
The Prime Minister can't guarantee there won't be. No Prime Minister in the history of politics can guarantee there won't be.
Or a budget. I mean, he wouldn't say that. He said they'll have one budget. That's what we've committed to. But what about a smaller statement that may involve changes to the tax regime? Right. I think it was a pretty good hit by Kemi Badenoch.
So what do you give Kemi today marks out of 10?
I mean, probably 7 out of 10.
Right, I've given her a 5. Kevin Schofield, what about yourself? You were mentioning beforehand you felt that she was too broad in her attack front.
Yeah, I think that it was almost like she couldn't decide the best way to go, so she threw everything at the wall. Yeah. Now, the way it works is they get 6 questions. Now, it's a long time since this has happened, but the leader of the opposition can ask 3, sit down again, come back a little bit later in the session and go on another attack line. I think that might have been a better tactic for her to employ, rather than, I think she ticked off maybe 4, maybe even 5 different topics in the 6 questions, and it was all just a little bit of a head spin, really, unless she was trying to maybe discombobulate the Prime Minister in some way by just hitting him with questions on different topics. I think it would be more effective if she decided 1, maybe 2 more targeted attacks and gone that way.
It may be the problem on Tulip Sadiq is the criticism certainly is that the PM has lost 2 ministers in 6 months, and this is a party which meant to draw the line under Tory sleaze, under looking like...
That's the point.
But she can't say that.
Why not?
Because she was a Tory in that government and resigned over Boris Johnson. She can't go after the very thing which is happening now to the Labour government. But someone who can is Ed Davey, and he didn't. And someone who can is maybe the Reform UK party.
Today's headline news was, you are, continuity sleaze. You're exactly what you said. And don't forget, the moral high horse rider, the highest jockey of them all on morality is Sir Keir Starmer. So if you're going to stand on a morality ticket, get him on there.
He would say, I can't take lectures on morality from a party that ran for 14 years and by the end virtually collapsed and ran out of steam.
And actually, isn't that a good point, Kevin? Because every time Kemi Badenoch goes on the offensive on immigration, it's like, well, 14 years in power, you failed to do it. Every time they go on the economy, well, we got a £22 billion black hole. Every time the SNP attacks Labour, they say, well, you're in charge of Scotland, then it's an absolute disgrace. Is the problem we have a double-headed opposition in like the SNP and the Tories who simply can't land a glove because when they had their turn, they screwed things up.
Yeah, perhaps. I think that line is starting to wear very thin for Labour, though, this constant, well, you had 14 years to fix it. We're past the 6-month mark now. They've had a fair amount of time in power themselves, and we know that they've already made quite a lot of mistakes. I think people just roll their eyes when they hear that type of defence. I think what might have been a better attack for her as well is to question Keir Starmer's judgment on Tulip Sadiq, rather than going down the sleaze route.
What did you know?
And he stood by her. And he stood by her for days earlier this week. He had full confidence in her, and we know that he has said in the past that she's his closest friend in politics. They're neighbouring constituents. They're obviously very close. And I think he has let that cloud his judgment when it comes to... Because it's been obvious for quite some time now that inevitably she was going to have to resign.
That issue of I would call it incurious Keir, someone who doesn't want to ask too many questions about... And the reports about Tulip Sadiq and her Bangladeshi links go back many years, aren't there? So why wouldn't you ask? I mean, but she is one of his closest allies in politics, a neighbouring constituency in North London. He's been to Bangladesh for her.
It's the same old chumocracy. It's the same old issues that were thrown at the Conservatives. Why didn't Kemi Badenoch say today, what did you know? How long ago did you know it? Just like Louise Hay, did you know about this fraud allegation? These questions were never asked. My point is Sir Keir Starmer just wriggling off the hook? Although let's get on to Chagos. It is a very, very important point, and it does appear that Sir Keir Starmer's giveaway, David Lammy's giveaway, has hit the
Trump
rafters.
Now has a veto on that deal. Yeah. He didn't have that veto until lunchtime today when Number 10 confirmed to us in terms it's right that the new administration has a chance to consider this deal. That means the deadline of next Tuesday, which they're working so hard to do, and in fact right now the Mauritius Attorney General is in the air on the way to London for more talks, but the pressure for a deal by the time he comes in has gone away. We know what Nigel Farage says about a deal. We know what we think Trump thinks. We don't know exactly, but we think people who speak for Trump or say they do, say that Trump doesn't like the deal. Why are we giving away sovereignty on land, 99-year lease on Diego Garcia, and paying billions for the process?
This is a great British giveaway to dwarf anything GB News has ever done. It's astonishing. £9 billion to give away something that we actually need, and it looks as though it's going to be torpedoed by Trump. Will this be the first big international embarrassment on foreign policy for the Labour Party?
I think it would be a huge embarrassment. They have thrown all their eggs into the Chagos basket, if I can put it like that. They have defended this deal. They've said that, they've had a lot of criticism about the deal, but they've repeatedly said it's a good deal. We know, Chris, don't we, that they wanted it done and dusted before Trump comes in because they know that Trump hates it, but now they've had to admit defeat on that. And it's such a bad look to basically give another country a veto over a major piece of government policy. It's very embarrassing.
I don't know why we're paying money to give away our land. I mean, Trump wants to buy Greenland. I get the idea of buying Greenland, if you sort of mean. But why are we not asking money for Mauritius for land we're giving now? I don't understand it.
What times ahead? Mums go to Iceland, Trump goes to Greenland. Gentlemen, we started off the day arguing about football. We part friends, agreeing on Chagos. Thank you very, very much indeed. Kevin Schofield and Chris Hope. Great stuff. Now, on to more serious issues. The search continues following the disappearance of two sisters in Aberdeen who've been missing now for a week. Eliza and Henrietta Hutsey were last seen on CCTV on Market Street in Aberdeen at 2 a.m. on Tuesday, the 7th of January. And we're joined now by our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire. Tony, what's the latest on this very, very concerning story?
Yes, good afternoon, Martin. This a very good way to describe it is very, very concerning today. This, as you can see around me, the sun is going down on day 8 since the two women disappeared. Henrietta and Eliza Hutsey, two twins of a set of triplets. Well, they were last seen walking down Market Street in Aberdeen city centre, where they crossed the Victoria Bridge just out of shot around the river bend behind me, and then took a right along this riverside path, and then from then, unfortunately, is anyone's guess. Now, certainly police have been combing this section of the river and really focusing their search here today. Over the last few hours, I've seen no less than 3 different sets of boats performing multiple tasks, all in a bid to help the search effort. But, you know, despite all that, officers are actually saying that they're remaining open-minded. They've been speaking to the family and friends of the two sisters, and for them, they're saying that a lot of the girls' actions that day were quite out of character. They were last seen at just after 2 a.m. on the 7th of January, which apparently, according to those who knew them, was uncharacteristically late at night. And also, they had ended a tenancy agreement quite abruptly before they made their journey where they were last seen. Now, speaking earlier to the press, Superintendent David Howson, he said and kind of laid out the rather wide range of theories that Police Scotland are currently going with in a bid to help find the sisters.
One of our theories has to be that they've entered the water for reasons unknown, and that's why so much of our search activity is focused on the river bank and the harbour itself. But we're not ruling out the fact that they may have left this area by means that we haven't identified yet, so land-based inquiries continue, both in terms of wider CCTV inquiries and house-to-house inquiries, as well as interviews with people who may have known them. Again, we're remaining open-minded, but we're 7 days into an inquiry with an enormous amount of inquiry carried out, and at the moment there's nothing that we've found that suggests criminality or suspicious circumstances.
Has almost got relegated last year.
Now, local businesses who are along the river today, now they've also been asked over the last week to check the property for any signs that the girls have passed through. And while the family has obviously lent an ear and to help with police appeal for further information, they've obviously requested some secrecy at this time, and this extremely difficult, I would imagine, and concerning time for them and their loved ones.
Thank you very much, Tony Maguire, for bringing us up to speed on the missing sisters, Eliza and Henrietta Hutsey. And they're actually part of triplets, and their brother was advising, please don't spread fake news, as we've seen so often in these cases there. Thank you very much, Tony Maguire, for the latest from Aberdeen. Now, coming up, GB News is today in the Red Wall area of Dudley, an area I know very well, having campaigned there in the past. And don't forget that Labour won there back in the general election. We're there today to find out whether voters there regret handing power to Sir Keir Starmer and how might they swing at a future election. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We were talking earlier about the issue of Siri listening to you. Well, it's not just your own conversations being sort of harvested for data, but it's a problem with AI. So what seems to have happened yesterday is that Apple issued a alert saying that Luke Littler had won the darts before he had. I mean, imagine what would, if he then gone on to lose, how that would have looked. I mean, obviously, because he went on to win, at least they got the story right, but before it had happened. So what it seems to happen is that the AI farms existing stories, and what it has done, that's the alert. We can see the alert there now, and it also claiming that Brazilian tennis player Rafael Nadal had come out as gay when actually a different Brazilian tennis player was actually mentioned in the original story. So what it does is you see that's branded as BBC Sport. What the Apple AI system does is it farms alerts that it thinks people are getting from the source and then summarises them into
one. That was going to be my question.
Into one alert.
It looks to me like you would assume, OK, the BBC are reporting this.
Absolutely.
So the BBC News might be saying something else.
So it could happen to any news organisation.
This has highlighted a massive issue. I mean, having editorial judgment and quality control, because if this is going on, it's just contributing to the flow of misinformation. Yes. And we know that this is a problem on social media, people reporting false things. But if it seems to come from trusted news sources, that is a massive issue in credibility. I mean, if you had something like Reuters, who's a big news provider, doing this, you could hold people accountable, you could make changes, but when it's the AI doing it, I mean, what do? You're going to have to reprogram it in some way.
And if you just lost control, if you're a news source, you've lost control of what goes out, because it basically farms it, puts your logo on it and sends it out, even when it's nonsense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
Now, brace yourselves, because how would you like to win 50 grand in tax-free moolah in our biggest ever Great British giveaway? Well, here's the details that you need to enter.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. That's tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this year. What would you spend it on? £50,000 could buy those treats you've always dreamed of having. And just one entry into the Great British Giveaway really could make £50,000 cash all yours. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good luck with that. Now then, Dudley has become a newly formed constituency in the West Midlands. In the 2024 general election, Dudley went back to Labour, winning a 1,900 majority with a 51% turnout. So what challenges is this new constituency facing? Well, let's head there now and join my good old pal, the GB News reporter, Jack Carson, who is there in Dudley. Jack, always a pleasure, my old son. It must be time for me to say Happy New Year. Now, Dudley is an area I know very, very well. I campaigned there in 2029. Call Brexit land. But of course, it's been flipping between the Blues and the Reds for some time now. What's the mood on the ground today?
Well, of course, we've been speaking to all kinds of different people. We've been speaking to people that run a flower market store. We're in someone's lounge. We've been speaking to the former MP, of course, of Dudley North, Marco Longy, as well, who's just recently defected to Reform, finding out what about the important issues, really, that matter to Dudley, and what the general feeling that we've got is as a newly created seat, Dudley, that newly created seat, it was won by the Labour Party. There is a lot of dissatisfaction on the ground, maybe, for how currently the new Labour government are dealing with certainly the issues that are important to them. One of the issues that is so important and really invoked such a spirit of community in this area was, of course, the Crooked House pub, which burnt down and was subsequently demolished. And the part of the campaign there, Paul Turner, who's from the Save the Crooked House campaign, joins us now. I mean, what was it about this pub that invoked such a reaction from the community in Dudley and the wider Black Country as well?
Well, the pub had stood here since 1765, which is before the United States of America existed. It had been a mill, it had been a farmhouse, and it became a pub in, I think, the 1830s. When it started to become crooked, it subsided, and there were various things done to keep it standing by Banks's, the brewery, and it became a tourist attraction, and it was part of the Black Country's culture. People came here, people would bring their friends here, people would show it off, and we all felt that it was ours, it was the Black Country's. It was owned by different people along the way, but everybody felt that it belonged to the community.
And I guess because it's now gone and the campaign there to get it rebuilt, did that almost feel like that was an attack on culture here in Dudley, in the Black Country, an attack on heritage?
Yes, it did. I mean, what happened was it happened over a few days. I actually started I set up a petition to stop the pub being stopped or changed use before it was even on fire, so a week before, and then of course it was on fire, then it was demolished, so everything happened really, really quickly. As soon as we found out it had been sold to somebody for an alternative use, it was gone. And of course everybody came out. There were hundreds and hundreds of people out protesting, the only thing we could do was insist that it was rebuilt. Unfortunately, the South Council agreed with us. They went along with that. They went through their lawyers and they got an enforcement notice issued to order the owners to rebuild as it was on the same site.
And just bring us up to date then with the kind of the latest on campaign. You know, if people are watching in Dudley that have been so invested in this situation and what's gone on here because of how much maybe this place meant to people in Dudley and the surrounding areas, I mean, what is the latest with the campaign?
Well, at the moment we're waiting for the owners have appealed against the enforcement notice. There's going to be a hearing, which we think is sometime in March, and they're appealing against having to rebuild it, and of course we're hoping that the council wins out and the enforcement notice stands.
All right, Paul, thank you so much for joining us for that little update on what's been such an important issue, Martin, for people here in Dudley and the wider Black Country as well. But one of the other things that people have been talking about, that we've been talking to people here about today, was that latest inflation figure. Here's what people on the high street told us earlier on.
See it being a problem for years to come. We've got a monetary system, a fiat monetary system, and they're printing more and more and more money, and the more you print, the less it's worth, the less its purchasing power, and this is the issue we've got. Most true economists understand this.
No, we don't. Every time you go out, you spend more than what you want to. You go shopping today and try and get a few things, and it's more expensive.
No way. They should go now. I think it'll get worse. I don't think it'll get better.
There, Martin, some of the people that we've spoken to on the high street today, there's certainly a lot of unhappiness at just how much money a lot of people are still having to spend in the shops, change the way they're budgeting. We spoke to one gentleman who quite literally said that he can't essentially, heat his home because he's got to try and choose to make sure he eats. So there's certainly a lot of unhappiness at that latest inflation figure here in Dudley today, Martin.
Thank you, Jack Colson, and thank you to Paul Turner there, the Crooked House boozer. It's a fantastic campaign. The community ran. They were literally picking bricks out of the ashes and putting them in containers to preserve their area. It's an area I know very well. I campaigned there. I was fortunate enough to be the member of the European Parliament, the MEP for the West Midlands in 2019. Dudley was on my patch, and I was always very, very grateful to receive there. Jack, we'll come back to you in the next hour, talk a little bit about the politics there on the ground and if they are in the mood for some kind of change. Jack Colson, always an absolute pleasure. We'll see you again in about an hour's time. Thank you very, very much. Now, still lots more to come between now and 4 o'clock, including more concerns for farmers that a new climate and nature bill could result in them losing their land and livelihoods under, you've guessed it, net zero and sustainability goals. But first, here's your headlines, and it's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you. 31 minutes past 3. The top story, Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch clashed over the economy at Prime Minister's questions earlier, trading blows on debt, tax hikes and leadership stability. Badenoch warned that the UK is spending more on debt than on schools and hospitals, accusing Labour's Chancellor Rachel Reeves of being unqualified and planning costly tax rises.
His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises this year? Yeah.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer called the Conservatives economic vandals in response and blamed them for a £22 billion black hole and the worst cost of living crisis in living memory, he said. The Prime Minister also defended Rachel Reeves, calling fiscal rules ironclad, but refused to rule out any March tax hikes amid rising borrowing costs.
We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole that they left. The Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them. Mr. Speaker, if we all thought the politics was about cheap points, I could criticise their chancellors, but I don't have enough time to go through all of the chancellors that they had. We have one budget, that's what we're committed to, strong fiscal rules, and we'll stick to them, unlike the party opposite.
In other news, Downing Street says the UK's handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius should be reviewed by US President-elect Donald Trump before it moves forward. The agreement includes a 99-year lease for the joint UK-US airbase on Diego Garcia, but has sparked concerns over security ties with China. Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel has called the negotiations a complete humiliation, while Tory leader Kemi Badenoch's branded it a disastrous surrender of British territory. But the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has defended the plan, insisting it ensures the military base's future and addresses what he described as wrongs of the past. And the Prime Minister says every effort will be made to stop Gerry Adams from receiving compensation for his detention during the Troubles. Sir Keir Starmer says repealing the Legacy Act, deemed unfit and unlawful by courts, might lead to payouts for Mr Adams and others, sparking criticism from the Conservatives. The Act blocks claims by over 400 people imprisoned in the 1970s, but Labour says a replacement is being drafted to balance victims' rights with legal obligations. If successful, Mr Adams could receive a six-figure sum for unlawful detention. And the government is reviewing a controversial free speech law for universities months after it was paused over concerns about protecting hate speech. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, passed in 2023, gave universities a duty to promote free speech and allow the regulator to fine institutions or student unions that fail to comply. Critics, including the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, paused the law last summer, warning it could expose universities to costly legal action. Well, now a government source says the Act will be adjusted to balance academic freedom with a proper complaints process. Those are the latest headlines. A full roundup at 4 o'clock. Next, though, we'll take a look at the markets.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a look at the markets for you this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2257 and €1.1881. The price of gold, £2,187 and 4 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,290 points.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this evening, it's going to remain quite dank and cloudy across the south, also some mist and fog developing and some patchy drizzle to the far northwest as a result of this frontal system just moving in here. But overall, high pressure largely dominating, which means it's a largely settled night to come. Lots of moisture trapped underneath this high though, which means quite cloudy conditions across parts of the south and southeast, quite murky at times, also likely to see further fog develop overnight. Even when we see these clearer skies, we could also see some patches of fog develop, also quite cloudy across the far north of Scotland where we're likely to see the bulk of the drizzle. But for many of us, a largely dry night, but it is going to be feeling chilly under those clearer skies. We may even see some pockets of frost by the morning. So to start on Thursday then across Scotland, as I say, lots of dry weather around, just a chance we could still see some patchy drizzle to the very far north, but largely dry across inland areas and feeling rather mild too, particularly in the northwest. Plenty of cloud across Northern Ireland, a few more clearer spells across northern parts of England, feeling chilly here, northern parts of Wales as well, some clear skies, possibly some pockets of frost, but across much of the south and southeast, fair amount of low clouds, some quite foggy conditions, could also be quite slow to clear during the early hours of the morning. So do take care if you're travelling around. Through much of the day though, we will start to see some brighter weather, mainly across northern parts of Wales and northern parts of England. Across the south and southeast, it looks like that cloud is there to stay through much of the day, and also fairly cloudy across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Still fairly mild, but likely feeling cooler than it has done this afternoon. As we head into the evening, we'll see fairly similar conditions. Once again, a mix of cloud and clearer spells, turning chilly under those clearer skies, and we'll see a return of that rain and drizzle just start to creep into the west later on in the night. And as we head towards the weekend, still that cloud sticking around and temperatures really struggling, so feeling rather chilly at times too. Bye for now.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. On the M5 in Worcestershire, 2 out of 3 lanes are closed southbound between junctions 5 and 6 from Droitwich to Worcester after an accident. The outside lanes also closed northbound past the scene with queues in both directions. In Carmarthenshire, the A476 is closed southbound at Fireback after an accident causing queues. In Gloucestershire, the A417 is closed westbound from the Air Balloon roundabout to the A46 at Brockworth after an accident and diesel spill. There are long delays towards there. There are delays of up to an hour with some cancelled trains on the West Coast Main Line between Milton Keynes Central and Euston Station in London after an incident. In Somerset, the A39 is closed north of Glastonbury after an accident, and in East Sussex, the A26 is closed in both directions between Uckfield and Lewes after an accident. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 3:39 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, the cost of potholes has hit a record high. £579 million is now spent by the AA on fixing vehicles damaged by potholes in a single year. And that's despite an extra 500 million quid, £500 million being spent on local road maintenance in England alone, bringing the total to a staggering £1.6 billion in 2025-2026. Now, the road campaigner, Mr. Pothole, his real name is Mark Morrill, set up the National Pothole Day 1 decade ago, but he says he's got no faith that any government wants to actually fix Britain's failing roads. And our East Midlands reporter, where there are lots of potholes, I can vouch, Will Hollis has this report.
The pothole plague, checkering the nation's roads, damaging cars and putting lives in danger. Near Brackley, Northamptonshire, Mr. Pothole is monitoring some of the worst.
As you come to this junction, there's some horrendous potholes. Could be lethal when they're full of water. Drivers are being forced to go onto the other side of the carriageway to avoid damaging their vehicles.
Mr. Pothole, aka Mark, has spent 12 years warning that the country's roads are crumbling.
When they're full of water, they just look like harmless puddles. The fact it could be lethal for a cyclist or someone on 2 wheels.
He set up National Pothole Day a decade ago, hoping to make a change, but now has no faith any government will fix Britain's roads.
The nation is sick to death with politics getting in the way of fixing our roads. Every politician and I've lost faith in most governments and authorities now actually doing anything about it. Don't seem to want to face up to the massive multi-billion pound backlog in road maintenance. £16.3 billion of carriageways in England and Wales need work now. And in 15 years' time, if they don't invest, 51% of our roads will be structurally unsound.
Despite a fall in the number of incidents, the cost of repairs is rocketing through inflation and a shortage of parts. Funding to fix England's roads in 2025 to 26 is £1.6 billion, £500 million more than last year. The Department for Transport has said it will ensure highway authorities spend the money wisely. Mark says it's not enough.
Giving small sums, which are a lot of money to me and you, over short term isn't going to solve the problem. We need an annual resurfacing programme year on year to get our roads up to a reasonable standard.
Will Hollis, GB News, Brackley.
And we're joined now by GB News' East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. Will, welcome to the show. Potholes really, really wind people up. They really, really matter. And I've got to say, Mark Morrell, Mr. Pothole, one of a kind. I'm devastated he's retiring. The big question is, will there be a Mr. Pothole Mark II? Or can this fella simply never be replaced?
Yes, Martin. Well, it's 10 years that Mark, Mr. Pothole, spent campaigning for National Pothole Day. Happy National Pothole Day, Martin. He started out just trying to get the potholes on his road fixed. But now, because of health issues, as well as having no faith that any government can sort out the pothole problems, he's retiring. We've got somebody else who is now retired, a retired HGV driver, somebody who knows the roads of Northamptonshire very well. We've got Richard. Richard, what's this road, Boundary Avenue in Rushden, like for potholes?
It's absolutely appalling. You get potholes, but here we've also got grooves where the previous patching is starting to come apart. So you've got the holes, you got the grooves, and you got the buses.
Very noisy buses, because it is cause school is coming out. Let's take a look at some of the potholes. Let's show the GB News viewers what makes this the worst, if not one of the worst roads in Northamptonshire, so local people tell me.
Yeah, well, you can see there's long stretches of road that are actually in a poor state. You've got the grooves, you've got the potholes, you've got the traffic coming backwards and forwards all the time, and the whole thing is just a long stretch with all this patching on it, which isn't any good at all. It's a long stretch, it's about 30 to 40 yards, probably longer than that, that's just absolutely up and down all the way.
And you're a retired HGV driver, You've driven coaches and lorries. Yeah. How does this road now in 2025 compared to the roads of your generations on the highways of Britain?
Well, of course, I'm going back a long time because I've been retired about 17 years now, but back in the 60s, there were bad roads. Of course there were. There's always been bad roads, but not on this scale. Now, wherever you go, you can see bad roads, you can see potholes, you can see patching that's not very effective. So all the time, you can spot these things, and I fear it's going to get worse.
And you've had a lifetime of paying tax to the British government. How do you feel that this is the state of your roads when you're a law-abiding taxpayer, pays your road tax, drives around?
Yeah, well, you see, I understand that there is this tightness of money. We're all being told that in so many areas of life. We know that. But surely, even bearing that in mind, we're entitled to have a decent road to drive on. And this is far from a decent road to drive on. It really is bad.
Richard Keach here in Rushden, Boundary Avenue. Local people tell me it's one of the worst roads in Northamptonshire. Martin, could it be one of the worst roads in the country? Well, the government says they're investing more money into fixing potholes and road maintenance, £1.6 billion this year, £500 million more than last year. But the question is, Martin, is that money enough?
Well, Will Hollis, done about potholes. I've seen smaller garden ponds. And, for a minute there, I thought that either you, Richard, or the cameraman was going to end up being pothole filler. You're walking down the middle of a road during rush hour, buses steaming past at the school, and you take care of yourselves. And here's an idea. How about we kill two birds with one stone and fill the potholes full of politicians? I digress. Will Hollis, thank you very, very much for joining us there. And by the way, very, very happy National Pothole Day. Now, if you're in search of some winter sun and who can blame all these potholes and the miserable weather, then here's a forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries, all sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Storm Felix is set to affect central parts of the Mediterranean, bringing some rain, mountain snow and also strong winds. But further west, largely settled for the Canary Islands, Madeira, Portugal and also most of Spain. But towards the eastern coast, we could see some heavy showers here. The heaviest likely across Sicily and parts of Sardinia, and also likely to see some mountain snow across the highest parts of Italy and also Greece. Towards the weekend, though, largely settled and temperatures remaining around the same.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we're going to introduce you to Liam Wildish. Liam, well, I'd like to think he's a friend of mine because I follow him on Instagram, on TikTok there as well.
You're a big fan, aren't you?
Big fan, because there's what he does. He's a cleaner. He cleans signs. But the thing is, he's not employed by councils or whatever. He does this voluntarily. And you sort of think to yourself, well, who cleans these signs? Why have these signs been allowed to get into this terrible state of disrepair and filthiness?
So basically, long story short, about 6 years ago, I used to be a window cleaner. In the community where I lived, I noticed all of the road signs were filthy, and I was perfectly equipped to clean them. So basically, I cleaned the road signs as a bit of a thank you to the community and sort of make a little bit of awareness of my window cleaning business at the time. Yeah. Sort of cleans up the area, makes the road safer, and that's kind of how that started. And people found it like a really satisfying sort of approach. So that sort of led on to today of a video in cleaning the dirty road signs and making sort of satisfying content with it as well.
What is the equipment? What have we got here?
So this is a water-fed pole system connected to a backpack, which is what feeds the water through the end of the brush there. It's perfectly equipped to basically remove this green dirty, it's like a mildew build-up that you get on the signs. Yeah. As you can see, this is like extremely effective at removing so.
So GB News viewers, if they spot a particularly grisly sign in their area, then they can get in touch.
They can do, yeah.
And Liam Wildish, the sign guy, can sort you out.
if you find Liam the sign guy online, drop me a message, let me know, and I'll add you to my list of places.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 4 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, campaigners are raising alarms over the upcoming Climate and Nature Bill, which could spell disaster for farmers and rural communities. Farmers could lose their land, while energy and food prices once again soar, all, of course, in the name of sustainability. Well, I'm joined now by GB News' Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie. Dougie, welcome to the show. So the climate, anything, it seems, that's got climate and nature in it, seems to end up doing people over. Particularly farmers. It's more expensive. This time round, guess what? It's great for insects. It's great for birds. What about for people? What about for farmers? Tell us more.
Well, this bill was brought up in early 2020. It was a private member's bill. It never made it. And through a bizarre ballot system, backbenchers get to bring these bills forward, and Ros Savage has decided to bring this bill forward on the 25th of January. Now, to make it worse, something the government has to adopt it, and that's quite common. And it was brought forward by the Lib Dems, Labour and the Greens, and it basically says that an assembly will be put in place of experts picked by who knows, they're not elected, and then those experts will give this to a committee, and that committee will turn whatever they think into government policy. Now, that could have big problems around the likes of heat pumps. If you can imagine, if you lived in one of the old collieries, you only own the ground so many metres into it because the coal board owns beneath it. How are you going to fit a heat pump? But more importantly, it actually affects the farming community, and farming is really unfairly treated because the calculator for carbon is actually calculated from the time a product leaves a foreign country and travels here. Our beef and cattle here are grass-fed, not soya-fed, no high protein. And Sam Chesney joins me now. And of course, Sam, you know all about this on farms. How much does government really understand farming?
I'm afraid to say government doesn't really understand farming, and these so-called experts and these so-called committees would just be drawing another wage and, blowing smoke into the air. We're farming here throughout the UK, producing the best quality produce we can. Here in Northern Ireland, we already have a nitrates action programme from 2017, so it limits the amount of nitrogen we use. We're in an area that there's no planning, so we've got no, there's no future for young people to come into the business. This is because of ammonia, with no planning for new buildings, with no planning for improved facilities, no planning for anything like that. And in fact, the carbon issue is another big issue. You can bring beef from New Zealand or Australia with no carbon, yet the beef produced in Northern Ireland or Scotland or England or Wales has carbon. It's totally ludicrous of what's going on.
And how bad would this be if this bill was to make it?
It's just another nail in the coffin for farmers throughout the UK. We're producing high quality food for our nation and across the world. If we don't produce it, somebody in the world will starve. 8 billion people across the world. We've got climate disorders, we've got fires in America, we've got wars in Ukraine. This food, needs to be produced. Do we condemn somebody in the world to starve? I don't think so. Not in my watch, anyhow.
Well, there you go. I mean, it will add costs to farming, especially. But the farming, if you're going to put costs on farming, that will come out in the consumer.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that if you're forcing farmers to wild land, there's less land to farm, there's less food being produced. That puts the price up. It cuts the profit of the farmers. This is basic stuff, and yet the wooden tops making these bills, they don't seem to have any grasp whatsoever of the realities of modern farming. Thank you, Dudley Beattie, as ever, for putting it so succinctly for us there. Always a pleasure to have your company. Thank you, Dudley Beattie. Great stuff. Now, plenty more to come in the next hour, including whether Tory leader Kemi Badenoch is up to the job at holding the Labour Party to account. That's because at PMQ today, Tulip Siddiq, it was like shooting fish in a barrel, go for it, on corruption. Didn't happen. She missed the target. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel. Now is your weather, and it's Honor Krizik.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this evening, it's going to remain quite dank and cloudy across the south, also some mist and fog developing and some patchy drizzle to the far northwest as a result of this frontal system just moving in here. But overall, high pressure largely dominating, which means it's a largely settled night to come. Lots of moisture trapped underneath this high though, which means quite cloudy conditions across parts of the south and southeast, quite murky at times, also likely to see further fog develop overnight. Even when we see these clearer skies, we could also see some patches of fog develop, also quite cloudy across the far north of Scotland where we're likely to see the bulk of the drizzle. But for many of us, a largely dry night, but it is going to be feeling chilly under those clearer skies. We may even see some pockets of frost by the morning. So to start on Thursday then across Scotland, as I say, lots of dry weather around, just a chance we could still see some patchy drizzle to the very far north, but largely dry across inland areas and feeling rather mild too, particularly in the northwest. Plenty of cloud across Northern Ireland, a few more clearer spells across northern parts of England, feeling chilly here, northern parts of Wales as well, some clear skies, possibly some pockets of frost, but across much of the south and southeast, fair amount of low clouds, some quite foggy conditions. Could also be quite slow to clear during the early hours of the morning, so do take care if you're travelling around. Through much of the day though, we will start to see some brighter weather, mainly across northern parts of Wales and northern parts of England. Across the south and southeast, it looks like that cloud is there to stay through much of the day, and also fairly cloudy across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Still fairly mild, but likely feeling cooler than it has done this afternoon. As we head into the evening, we'll see fairly similar conditions. Once again, a mix of cloud and clearer spells, turning chilly under those clearer skies, and we'll see a return of that rain and drizzle just start to creep into the west later on in the night. And as we head towards the weekend, still that cloud sticking around and temperatures really struggling, so feeling rather chilly at times too. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Manchester, the M61 is blocked northbound after a collision between Junction 1 for the M60 and Junction 2 for the A580. In North Yorkshire, the A1M is blocked after a vehicle caught fire. It's blocked in both directions at Junction 42 for Selby Fork. In Worcestershire, the M5 southbound is partly blocked after a collision between Junction 5 for Droitwich and Junction 6 for Worcester. In Oxfordshire, the M40 northbound is partly blocked after a breakdown between Junction 8A at Oxford Services and Junction 9 for Bicester and the A34. The inside lane of 3 is blocked there.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan and I won £30,000 with the Great British Giveaway. I'd say to people who want to enter or are wondering whether to enter to do it, it happens to people like me.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A very, very good afternoon to you. It's 4 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting for you live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. On today's show, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer's anti-corruption minister, Tulip Siddiq, was forced to resign over corruption allegations. And yet, at Prime Minister's Question Times today, Kemi Badenoch failed to nail Starmer and instead attacked him on the economy on the day that inflation went down. My question is simple. Does Kemi Badenoch have the bite, or do the Tories need a leader who'll go for the kill? And a group called Great British Political Action Committee has slammed Labour's plan to surrender the Chagos Islands and pay Mauritius a whopping £9 billion for the privilege. And it's been slammed as a reckless and short-sighted deal. Now, members of this group include Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Baroness Kate Hoey. She'll join me in the studio this hour. And yesterday, Keir Starmer unveiled a £12 billion trade deal with Iraq to allow us to finally deport some illegal immigrants. Well, today, I'll be joined by an Iraqi security expert who asks this pertinent questions. Why are we cooperating with a state that has just passed a law making it legal for grown-up men to marry 9-year-old girls? And Jerry Adams could be in line for a British taxpayer-funded payout because of Sir Keir Starmer's human rights plans. Well, today, the Prime Minister seems to do a U-turn on this issue. Well, on today's show, I'll speak to the son of a Belfast police officer who was murdered by the IRA. And that's all coming up in your next hour. Has Badenoch got the bite? Does she have the mettle to be the leader of the opposition? Today, it seemed to me it was on a plate. Tulip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, was forced to resign over corruption. Louise Haigh, the transport minister, had to resign over a fraud allegation. Sue Gray had to go 3 down. There's an opportunity, surely, to say, you lot, you're just the same. It's endless sleaze and corruption, and let's put the boot in. Sir Keir Starmer was there to be shot like a fish in a barrel, and it simply didn't happen. Instead, Kemi Badenoch went off on one about the economy on the day. Finally, there was a piece of good news for Rachel Reeves. Inflation went down, albeit a small amount. And I'd ask you this. Does Kemi Badenoch have the teeth to be leader of the opposition? What do you think? Let me know. Get in touch, gbnews.com/your say. But now here's your headlines, and it's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you, and good afternoon to you at 2 minutes past 4. Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch have clashed over the economy at Prime Minister's questions earlier, trading blows on debt, tax hikes and leadership stability. Badenoch warned the UK is now spending more on debt than on schools and hospitals, accusing Labour's Chancellor Rachel Reeves of being unqualified and planning costly tax rises.
His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises this year? Yeah.
Well, Keir Starmer called the Conservatives economic vandals and blamed them for £22 billion of black hole and the worst cost of living crisis in living memory, he said. The Prime Minister also defended Rachel Reeves, calling fiscal rules ironclad, but refused to rule out March tax hikes amid rising borrowing costs.
We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole that they left. The Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them. Mr. Speaker, if we all thought the politics was about cheap points, I could criticise their chancellors, but I don't have enough time to go through all of the chancellors that they had. We have one budget, that's what we're committed to, strong fiscal rules, and we'll stick to them, unlike the party opposite.
Downing Street says that the UK's handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius should be reviewed by US President-elect Donald Trump before it moves forward. The agreement includes a 99-year lease for the joint UK-US airbase on Diego Garcia, but has sparked concerns over security ties with China. Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel called the negotiations a complete humiliation, while Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch branded it a disastrous surrender of British territory. But Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has defended the plan, insisting it ensures the military base's future and addresses what he described as wrongs of the past. And the Prime Minister's also said that every effort will be made to stop Gerry Adams from receiving compensation for his detention during the Troubles. Sir Keir Starmer says repealing the Legacy Act, deemed unfit and unlawful by courts, might lead to payouts for Mr Adams and others, sparking criticism from the Conservatives. Well, the Act blocks claims by over 400 people imprisoned in the 1970s, but Labour says a replacement is being drafted to balance victims' rights with legal obligations. If successful, Mr Adams could receive a six-figure sum for unlawful detention. The government is reviewing a controversial free speech law for universities, months after it was paused over concerns about protecting hate speech. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, passed in 2023, gave universities a duty to promote free speech and allowed the regulator to fine institutions or student unions that failed to comply. But critics, including Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, has paused the law last summer, warning it could expose universities to costly legal action. Now, a government source says the Act will be adjusted to balance academic freedom with a proper complaints process. Negotiators from Israel and Hamas are reportedly closing in on a Gaza ceasefire deal after now more than 15 months of conflict. Unnamed Israeli officials claim that Hamas has agreed to the latest draft brokered by Qatari, US and Egyptian mediators, but Prime Minister Netanyahu's office had denied any agreement. Well, we are expecting in the next few minutes, in fact, the Qatari Prime Minister's spokesperson to address the talks in a press conference in Doha shortly, and we are expecting, reportedly, to hear confirmation that an agreement has indeed been reached. The proposed deal will include a 6-week truce, initial hostage releases and phased Israeli troop withdrawals from Gaza's populated areas. Back here, Mark Chapman, Kelly Cates and Gabby Logan have all been confirmed as the next presenters of the BBC's football highlights programme, Match of the Day. It was announced after last year the current host of the BBC's flagship sports show, Gary Lineker, said he'll be stepping down at the end of the season. The former England striker has presented the show since 1999, when the trio take over as hosts, and it will be the first time the role's been shared by 3 people. And tributes are pouring in for Linda Nolan, who has died at the age of 65 after her decades-long battle with breast cancer. The Irish star was part of the family group known as the Nolans, which also included her sisters Colleen, Maureen, Bernie, Denise and Anne. Colleen has called her sister a beacon of love, kindness and strength, saying Linda passed peacefully surrounded by family in Blackpool Hospital. Those are the latest headlines for now. We'll keep across developments in Qatar for you as that ceasefire deal reportedly comes into force. For now, though, time to head back to Westminster and Martin.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much, Sam. Now, here is the big question. Did the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, miss an open goal today, a bit like Liverpool last night against my team at Nottingham Forest? Well, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer's anti-corruption minister was forced to resign over corruption allegations. And yet, at PMQs today, Kemi Badenoch decided to lead her main attack not on the endless sleaze in the Labour Party, but on the economy. On the day when inflation finally went down and Rachel Reeves was thrown a tiny morsel of good news. So the question is this: does Badenoch have the bite? Or do the Tories need a leader who go for the kill? Well, I'm joined in the studio by GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, you were at PMQs, you were watching it from the press gallery. You get a ringside seat, you can see the real kind of, cut and thrust of all of this. I was merely listening on the radio to GB News, but I thought this. Yesterday, when it was announced that Tudip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, was forced to resign over corruption, I thought...
Resigned, Martin.
Yeah, resigned. I thought, here's your attack line. You promised us, Mr Morality on your high horse, forever on the high horse, the shining knight of morality, Sir Keir Starmer. You promised us there'd be no more of this sort of monkey business. And yet, here we are. Louise Haigh, also forced to resign over that fraud allegation of the mobile phone. Sue Gray, the Chief of Staff, stepped down. 1, 2, 3, get him in a row. There's your attack line. Instead, she went in on the economy. I headbutted the desk. I just thought, it's there. Go for it. And she didn't. We've talked in the past. The farmers, 500 tractors were outside Whitehall, blaring their horns out. You could hear it. At PMQs, she simply didn't refer to it. My point is simple. Is she missing the mark? Is she too polite?
Not too polite, Martin. I've had a different view. I thought she did pretty well in the looking down at what the questions she asked about the budget, the limping along economy. We're having big figures out tomorrow on the economy. Yes, inflation has fallen by 0.1%, minuscule amount. You know, will there be a mini budget after the 26th of March when we get the OBR figures back? On Chagos Islands, will that be a surrender? We have now know from lunchtime that, in fact, there won't be any deal on that until Trump comes in, and therefore weeks or months after that, on Tuesday.
If at all.
If at all. And I thought, you know, on the issue of damages paid to Jerry Adams, he's the Sinn Féin president. He always denied being any links or in the IRA. But, you know, with Jerry Adams, that's interesting too. You know, will money be paid out to him for being, you know, who would now, against his human rights, be detained back in the 70s? The PM then said, you know, we'll look at every conceivable way to stop these cases claiming damages. So I think, it's a hard job to do for Kemi Badenoch. She's got 6 questions a week. She's tried to find the most newsy way of doing it. I think it is right, though, that we haven't really heard from her. She's done an interview with Charlie Peters this week.
And she called people peasants and got in hot water for that.
Well, she's not people, Pakistani grooming gang. Yeah. She's trying to describe, I think, an uneducated type of person who may come here and didn't know any better or something. That's what she's trying to say in her way she says things. Last week was at a school. We haven't yet had a launch of Kemi Badenoch this year, and we are halfway through January of this new year. She hasn't really recovered, I think, since the misstep of attacking Nigel Farage over members of Reform UK. And I think, you know, we're waiting for her to get going. And I would say, finally, if you shut your eyes and ask your viewers today, who is the person who speaks for the right? The answer probably right now is Nigel Farage, and that's a problem for her.
It is a problem, and it's reflected in the polling.
Yeah.
We've seen in the 2 polls out this week, the Conservatives slipping 2 points, Reform putting on 10 points. And in the latest poll that was out yesterday, I had a drill into the metrics of the seats earlier on. Can you believe if this latest poll holds through, then James Cleverly will lose his seat to Reform. These are Portillo moments on steroids, and this could be a huge problem.
Well, that poll from YouGov is extraordinary. The first one they've done since the election. Labour down 9 points.
Yes.
It's fascinating. The Reform up 10, we know that, to 25, 1 behind 26 on Labour. Tories down 2 to 22. She is not cutting through for the right, and this is why all the chat is now starting in where I work in Parliament about how will Reform and the Conservatives unite. And if they do unite, it's a problem for Labour looking at that. But the egos in those 2 parties suggest the current leaderships won't allow it.
Well, Mel Stride today on the talk of a leadership, of some kind of deal between Conservatives and Reform. He said we're a broad church, but Nigel Farage wants to burn the church down. And Nigel Farage himself saying the Tories cannot be trusted, there will be no deals. Of course, 4 years is a long time in politics. Chris, stick with us, because I'm now going to speak to the former Labour advisor, Kevin Marr. Kevin, always a pleasure to have you on the show. And I believe it's not still too late to say a very happy new year to you. Do you think I've got a point here? You've worked for Labour before. You've written speeches. You've worked in the press department. I just think Kemi Badenoch had an open goal today. Tulip Siddiq, corruption, Louise Haigh. Get that in a line. You can go at them on sleaze, on cronyism, on corruption. And I think Kemi Badenoch just misfired. If you're advising Sir Keir Starmer today, you think you had a pretty good day? You got off the hook quite lightly.
I think he did pretty well, actually, today. He got a few decent shots in as well, talking about the Tories being economic vandals. He kept throwing this back at them. He referenced the letter that he got from Liz Truss, who'd asked him to cease and desist, referring to her having crashed the economy, and said that he'd had a letter from a constituent in a Labour-held seat to rub the point home. Of course, she lost her seat in the general election. So I think Starmer did pretty well, actually. I think Kemi Badenoch's got a couple of problems. I think she probably was going to go... She went on the economy, as you pointed out, but I think they may have gamed that perhaps the inflation figures were not going to be moderately better than moderately worse. So I think that's probably shot a fox a little bit. It's been a very tough week for the government. You know, a week is a long time in politics, as Harold Wilson famously put it. It's been a very long week for Rachel Reeves, but there's a glimmer of hope there with those inflation figures today and possibly monthly growth figures tomorrow. So I think Badenoch bet on the economy, and actually she should probably have gone with Labour's difficulties with Tulip Sadiq, which I think are pretty significant and quite totemic. And I would be very interested when polling comes out about this issue, about what people actually think about it, because I think it would be quite damaging for Labour. And I think probably that was a deeper vein in terms of political attack, and she probably should have gone with that.
I think that's the point, though, Kevin, because, you know, as I was saying to Chris Hope, if you're going to ride on a ticket of being Mr. Morality, you know, riding in on your high horse, we're not going to be anything like the 14 years previous. This is the turning the page on Tory failure, on the sleaze, the corruption, the nepotism, you name it. That was the pitch. And yet, we're merely months in, and Tulip Sadiq has fallen, Louise Haigh has fallen, Sue Gray has fallen. The opportunity to say you're exactly the same, talk about change, it's just continuity, and that opportunity wasn't taken. And every time Kemi Badenoch attacks on the economy, you know, sure as night follows day, £22 billion black hole. That's the response. If you attack on immigration, well, you can control the borders in 14 years. So those attacks are neutered. And instead, surely, you have to go for the red meat. Get your teeth stuck in. Point out that you are just like all the rest. And just say it for long enough, people believe it.
I think that's you're right. That's a damaging point. I mean, this government's, you know, got muddy wheels, if I can put it like that, having been in office for just 6 months. Lots of kind of unforced errors that it's made in its early days that it shouldn't have done. It should have been tighter. But I think you can see from that performance at the dispatch box today, you know, Labour's lines are still kind of pretty well grooved in. They can still throw a lot of the legacy of the issues that they're grappling with and some of the things they may be failing on. They can throw that back at the Conservatives at the moment and say, well, you left us with an absolute shambles, and therefore, you know, it's going to take a while to fix. Now the public's appetite for hearing that will wane, and there's nothing as damaging in this game as to be tarnished with you're just as bad as the other lot. So you're right. I mean, that was probably the attack line that Badenoch should have gone on today, but she didn't. But the big problem that she's got, and Chris was just mentioning this a moment ago, is that, you know, you look at that current polling and you look at the Conservatives, no boost from Badenoch's leadership at all, and you look where Reform is, absolutely breathing down their neck. Now, how do these two porcupines mate ahead of the next general election to kind of crystallise the right-wing vote? And it's very difficult to see how any kind of accommodation can be made. You're right, there's lots of big egos involved here. A lot of people in Reform don't trust the Conservatives. A lot of their voters, some of them are even ex-Labour voters, don't like the Tories anyway. So it's very difficult for either side to really give way. The Conservative Party, you know, going strong for 250 years, does not want to kind of break bread with this usurper, as they would see it either. So it's very difficult to find where the point at which they come together. Now, until they do, the field is left for Labour, really.
How do two porcupines mate? Very, very carefully. On that point, Chris Hope would like to fire a question at you.
Hi, Kevin. Chris Hope in the studio here with Martin. I just wondered at what point can Labour stop attacking the Conservatives' record? I mean, I would contend that's why she couldn't go hard on the sleaze idea, the obviously losing Louise Haigh and now the second minister in 6 months in Tulip Sadiq, because obviously the turnover of ministers under the Tory party was extreme in the last years of that government, and that's why it always be thrown back at Kemi Badenoch. But when will that end? When will this record of failure, it's all your fault to the Tory party, end from Labour?
I think they'll keep pushing it for a good while yet. We've got the Rachel Reeves has got her spring statement, I think, on the 26th of March. So it may be that if the economy starts to look like it's lifting up, then some of the messaging might change at that point. But I think while things are difficult, while the squall is still going around in terms of a very uncertain economy and public services that are underfunded and not very match fit, I think until some of that starts to turn a corner, they will keep blaming the last government. And eventually it will reach a point where people say, yada, 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 we've heard all that before, what are you doing? But I don't think we're quite at that point yet.
Kevin Moore, I think you're right. I think we'll be at the point where previously undiscovered tribes in the Amazonian rainforest will know we've got a £22 billion black hole. They will know Sir Keir Starmer's father was a toolmaker. Kevin Moore and Chris Hope, always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. Now let's move on, because how would you like to win £50,000 in tax-free moolah in our biggest ever Great British Giveaway? Well, here's the details that you need to try and trouser it.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan and I won £30,000 with the Great British Giveaway. I'd say to people who want to enter or are wondering whether to enter to do it, it happens to people like me.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost news.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Coming up, GB News is today in the Red Wall area of Dudley, the area I used to be the MEP for. The Labour won back in the general election from the Conservatives to find out whether voters there regret handing power to Sir Keir Starmer and who they might plump for next. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And fashionistas are keen to see which new trends are set to hit the catwalk.
Well, our next guest is very well placed to share her predictions with us after being a contestant on hit ITV series Dress the Nation, as well as being an upcycling and sewing consultant.
Wow. Joining us now is Tendai Murewe. I want to go back to you appearing on the ITV Dress the Nation.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like?
Oh, that was one of my highlights as a upcycling consultant. I learned to sew in my kitchen 5 years ago. And then, during COVID, just making masks. Then the next thing I was on a Dress the Nation, making dresses in front of TV. Yeah, it was just incredible. I think we all had all these clothes that we have, but we don't know what to do with them. So mainly I started with men's jackets, taking off the sleeves and putting it like a print on.
I've tried this. I've tried taking off my sleeves before. I now have about 3 jackets with no sleeves. I never managed to put them back on.
You need to come to a workshop. You need to come to a workshop.
I need an upcycling consultant. 2025, what can we expect fashion-wise?
I think bold prints are back. People are loving. I think you walk on the streets in frollals and oversized men's jackets.
So the exact opposite. We have drastically underperformed this morning. You're just saying not like us.
We just woke up this morning and thought it's winter, it's cold, it's grey.
Grey, miserable.
Is that not the way to go?
No, it is. I think because fashion is expressive. It's whatever you want to express yourself.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:25 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Thanks for your company. Now, Dudley has become a newly formed constituency in the West Midlands, my old stomping ground. In the 2024 general election, Dudley went back to the Labour Party, winning a 1,900 majority with a 51% turnout. So what challenges is this new constituency facing, and who might they plot for at a future election? Well, to tell us more, our GB News reporter Jack Carson is in Dudley. Jack, welcome back to the show. It's a very, very, it's a grassroots part of the country. It's a no-nonsense part of the country, and it's one that's been politically pretty promiscuous. They voted Brexit Party in huge numbers in 2019 at that European election. I was the MEP for the area. I campaigned in the area. I know the people there. They are absolutely sound as a pound. They voted for Conservatives in 2019, get Brexit done, but they went back to the Labour Party on the recent election. What's the mood on the ground now? Well, they're fed up with what they've got, and how do you think their appetite might be for changing to something new, Jack?
Well, this is one of the things that a lot of people have told us, the people that we've spoken to, whether it's on the high street, whether it was in Dave Raybald's lounge this morning, or you know, even Mark O'Longy, the former MP here, before that seat became just Dudley, he was the Dudley North MP. There is a feeling here of unhappiness in general at the way the government are doing and their trajectory. This area voted for a Labour MP, but Labour only increased their vote share by just over 3%. It was Mark O'Longy, the Conservative candidate, that lost 34% of that vote share. You mentioned that it was a low turnout. That is naturally going to impact things in a newly created seat, but the Reform Party took 26.5% of the vote. So there is a real feeling, and strong feeling, about whether that move to reform in the last general election is going to increase over the next few years. The issues being brought up to us in general today have been immigration, Martin. That's been one of the big key issues. It's one of the concerns that a lot of Labour MPs in areas like where we are today, right in the heart of the Midlands, in the heart of the Black Country. This is a place where industry has come and go, and it's the future and uncertainty possibly around that future, which is where people are really thinking they want a government, they want a party locally here that represents their interests the most. They don't necessarily feel, it's the general feeling that we've got here today, that is necessarily being done right now. A group of Labour MPs, a Red Wall caucus, are concerned that Keir Starmer isn't focusing enough on the issues like immigration, that he needs to put that really at the forefront to be able to fight that charge that Reform seems to be having across in certain areas, and whether actually politically this area might well go to Reform at a future general election, even in local elections, which we know will be coming up every year. You know, in the next few years, will Reform be able to gain here in areas like that? They're certainly hoping for that, but it's issues right now that are also worrying people. It's the latest inflation figure out today, Martin, that we got down to 2.5%, but not down really enough that people really are feeling an impact. They've been telling us that on the high street. Here's what they told us.
See it being a problem for years to come. We've got a monetary system, a fiat monetary system, and they're printing more and more and more money, and the more you print, the less it's worth, the less its purchasing power, and this is the issue we've got. Most true economists understand this.
No, you don't. Every time you go out, you spend more than what you want to. You go shopping today and try and get a few things, and it's more expensive.
No way. They should go now. I think it'll get worse. I don't think it'll get better.
There you go, Martin. You heard from those people on the street. There is a general feeling of unhappiness about the amount of money that people have in their pockets. It's basic everyday issues, being able to budget. We met a 91-year-old man earlier today who says he has to be very careful when he budgets. We also met a gentleman on the street today who told us that he has to choose between whether to wear his clothes to bed in order to make sure he doesn't put the heating on, and that would mean then he'd be able to eat. So there are people here that are really, in trouble with the way that inflation is, with how much things are costing. That concern naturally across this new constituency, across this area, will carry on into local elections in the future, possible general elections. These are the kind of issues that Reform will be looking at to try and capitalise on. Mark O'Longy, the former Conservative MP for Dudley North, who might well be, not confirmed, but might well be the candidate for Dudley when it comes to the next general election, he will be hoping that his local connection to people here will mean that Reform might be able to make ground, but ultimately Labour have got many years still left in government, it seems, to be able to prove people wrong. And as I was mentioning earlier, Martin, this Red Wall caucus, MPs that represent areas like where we are here today in the Midlands, trying to tell Keir Starmer to focus on the issues like immigration, to try and bat really away the interest and maybe the resurgence of the Conservative Party here, or even possibly Reform being able to flip a seat like this.
You know, Jack Carlson is an excellent summary of what's going on. It's an area I've campaigned in, though. The people in Dudley Market, they really know their politics. They really care. It's about the cost of living. And I think you've hit on a crucial point, Jack, and that is the none of the above party. The apathy amongst voters across Dudley, across huge swathes of the country, particularly in the Red Wall, was massive back in July. People just didn't bother to get off their sofa, and you often think, well, who can blame them? And I think a new insurgent party that offers something different, particularly patriotic values, working class values, loving your country, talking about the unfashionable things like immigration, talking about winter fuel allowance. I think it's all up for grabs. A huge, exciting time ahead. And thank you, Jack Carlson. An excellent summary. As ever, my friend, thank you very, very much, Jack Carlson there in Dudley. Superb. Now, moving on, still lots more to come between now and 5 o'clock, including Jerry Adams could be in line for a British taxpayer-funded payout because of Sir Keir Starmer's human rights plans. But today, I'll speak to the son of a Belfast police officer who was murdered by the IRA. But first, here's your latest news headlines, and it's Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. We're 32 minutes past 4. Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch have clashed over the economy at Prime Minister's questions, trading blows on debt, tax hikes and leadership stability. Badenoch warned the UK is now spending more on debt than schools and hospitals and accused Labour's Chancellor of being unqualified and planning costly tax rises.
His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises this year? Yeah.
Sir Keir Starmer called the Conservatives economic vandals, though, and blamed them for a £22 billion black hole and what he described as the worst cost of living crisis in living memory. The Prime Minister also defended Rachel Reeves, calling fiscal rules ironclad, but refused to rule out March tax rises amid rising borrowing costs.
We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole that they left. The Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them. Mr. Speaker, if we all thought the politics was about cheap points, I could criticise their chancellors, but I don't have enough time to go through all of the chancellors that they had. We have one budget, that's what we're committed to, strong fiscal rules, and we'll stick to them, unlike the party opposite.
Downing Street says the UK's handover of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius should be reviewed by the US President-elect Donald Trump before moving forward. The agreement includes a 99-year lease for the joint UK-US airbase on Diego Garcia, but has sparked concerns over security ties with China. Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel has called the negotiations a complete humiliation, while Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch branded it a disastrous surrender of British territory. The Prime Minister has defended the plan, insisting it ensures the military base's future and addresses, he says, wrongs of the past. And the Prime Minister's also said that every effort will be made to stop Jerry Adams from receiving compensation for his detention during the Troubles. Sir Keir Starmer says repealing the Legacy Act, deemed unfit and unlawful by the courts, might lead to payouts for Mr Adams and others, sparking criticism from the Conservatives. The Act blocks claims by over 400 people imprisoned in the 1970s, but Labour says a replacement is being drafted to balance victims' rights with legal obligations. Well, if successful, Mr Adams could receive a six-figure sum for unlawful detention. And negotiators from Israel and Hamas are reportedly very close to confirming a Gaza ceasefire deal after more than 15 months now of conflict. Unnamed Israeli officials claim Hamas has agreed to the latest draft brokered by Qatari, US and Egyptian mediators. The Qatari Prime Minister's spokesperson is expected to address talks in Doha during a press conference shortly. We will, of course, keep across any lines coming to us out of that press conference. The proposal is expected to include a 6-week truce, initial hostage releases and phased Israeli troop withdrawals from Gaza in the coming weeks. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour, and Martin will be back with you after this break.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this evening, it's going to remain quite dank and cloudy across the south. Also some mist and fog developing and some patchy drizzle to the far northwest as a result of this frontal system just moving in here. But overall, high pressure largely dominating, which means it's a largely settled night to come. Lots of moisture trapped underneath this high, though, which means quite cloudy conditions across parts of the south and southeast, quite murky at times. Also likely to see further fog develop overnight. Even when we see these clearer skies, we could also see some patches of fog develop. Also quite cloudy across the far north of Scotland, where we're likely to see the bulk of the drizzle. But for many of us, a largely dry night, but it is going to be feeling chilly under those clearer skies. We may even see some pockets of frost by the morning. So to start on Thursday then across Scotland, as I say, lots of dry weather around, just a chance we could still see some patchy drizzle to the very far north, but largely dry across inland areas and feeling rather mild too, particularly in the northwest. Plenty of cloud across Northern Ireland, a few more clearer spells across northern parts of England, feeling chilly here, northern parts of Wales as well, some clear skies, possibly some pockets of frost, but across much of the south and southeast, fair amount of low clouds, some quite foggy conditions. Could also be quite slow to clear during the early hours of the morning, so do take care if you're travelling around. Through much of the day, though, we will start to see some brighter weather, mainly across northern parts of Wales and northern parts of England. Across the south and southeast, it looks like that cloud is there to stay through much of the day, and also fairly cloudy across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Still fairly mild, but likely feeling cooler than it has done this afternoon. As we head into the evening, we'll see fairly similar conditions. Once again, a mix of cloud and clearer spells, turning chilly under those clearer skies, and we'll see a return of that rain and drizzle just start to creep into the west later on in the night. And as we head towards the weekend, still that cloud sticking around and temperatures really struggling, so feeling rather chilly at times too. Bye for now.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Manchester, the M61 northbound is queuing after a collision. It's between junction 1 for the M60 and junction 2 for the A580. In Worcestershire, long delays on the M5 southbound where 2 lanes are shut after a vehicle fire earlier and a collision between junction 5 at Droitwich and junction 6 for Worcester and Pershaw Lane. In Oxfordshire, the M40 northbound is partly blocked after a breakdown. It's between junction 8A for Tame and junction 9 for Bicester and the A34. In Essex, delays on the clockwise M25. That's partly blocked by a broken down car. It's just before junction 26. That's the turn-off for Waltham Abbey.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Your time is 4:39 with me, Martin Daubney, here on GB News. Now, fury has been sparked as it's revealed that the former Sinn Féin president and suspected terrorist Gerry Adams is in line potentially for taxpayer-funded compensation under Labour human rights plans. And the law currently blocks his claim for compensation, but two sections of the 2023 Northern Ireland Troubles Act could now be reversed. And IRA victims have slammed the move as simply unacceptable. Well, now we can speak with Gavin Lamore, whose father was shot dead by the IRA in 1988. Gavin, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have your company. So, Gavin, could you tell us, if you wouldn't mind, about the story, what's happened to your father?
Well, I've been trying to get justice for the last 36 years and have been through every department within the police, the Ombudsman, the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. Unfortunately, with the Legacy Act as it stands, all civil actions are currently suspended. But with the repealing of the Act, at least then victims of terrorist attacks can at least then try to seek justice through legal means. And your father was shot dead, I understand. Constable John Lamore shot dead at an ice cream parlour in October 1998. What happened? Well, that's correct. Shortly before closing time, two gunmen walked in and approached the counter and shot him point blank range and shot at a couple of the customers that were also present in the shop. And to date, no one's been charged with the murder. There's various names have been passed over the years as to who exactly was involved. Some of those involved have now died. But I think it's the current policy exchange think tank document that has sparked all the media fury. Of course, I think it's absolutely disgusting that the likes of Gerry Adams could be considering getting compensation for what happened 50 years ago, effectively. But that and the previous lawfare against the British Army veterans, I think, are, say, just cynical, disingenuous covers for the real reason why they want to stop the repeal of the Legacy Act, and that is the pending civil actions that could arise from it. It's not just the two sections that may allow them to take compensation that are the problem. The problem that wasn't compatible with ECHR law was effectively the conditional immunity, the limits on civil actions and the rules on disclosure of sensitive material. And I think that is ultimately what this is about preventing coming out. And Gavin, how does it make you feel you've tried for so long to get resolution, to get justice, to have an inquiry that's been denied? There are many, many people who lost loved ones, so painful as that is, who've never had that justice, never had that compensation. How does it make you feel to even hear the notion that somebody like Gerry Adams could get a single taxpayer of taxpayers' money? So obviously I find that part of it disgusting, but ultimately, without repealing the Legacy Bill as it stands, don't forget there was unanimous opposition to it from every political party in Northern Ireland and all the victims groups, because it was being put through to protect what on the surface Middle England was going to say, oh no, we can't have compensation going to terrorists. Unfortunately, in Northern Ireland, with the Good Friday Agreement, we've already effectively had an amnesty of sorts where convicted terrorists were let free, all in the name of buying peace. But without repealing the current Act, there's no opportunity for civil action for actual victims of terrorist attacks. And so to try and make out that it's solely to stop Gerry Adams getting compensation or for former Army veterans being prosecuted is only a small part of the story. The bigger part is what I believe, certainly in my father's case and others, is state collusion with the IRA, We've heard plenty of stuff over the years about state collusion with loyalist paramilitaries, but I think it was actually a bigger problem with state collusion with Republican paramilitaries. All the intelligence material here from the police and the army all ultimately fed back to MI5, and the security services fed back to the secretaries of state over the years to make policy decisions. I think that is where the bigger problem lies. It's the whole idea of the amnesties with the letters of comfort that were given out. For example, John Daubney, I believe he received his letter of comfort in 2007. The bigger question has to be around those letters, and certainly the current Prime Minister has an awful lot to answer for, because from 2003 to 2008, Sir Keir Starmer was the human rights advisor to the Policing Board for Northern Ireland, who were responsible for issuing the letters of comfort. So one has to ask the question, did Keir Starmer actually draft these letters? Did he know of the crimes that the individuals were going to be receiving them for? I think that is very, very serious questions for him to answer.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Gavin Lamore. And I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry for the loss of your father. And I hope you can find resolution at some point in the future. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show today. Your time is very, very much appreciated. Thank you, my friend. That's worth noting. That's Keir Starmer says that he will strive to prevent Gerry Adams from receiving any compensation. Of course, Gerry Adams was the president of Sinn Féin and always denied any involvement in any IRA terrorist movements. Now, if you're in search of some winter sun this summer, here is the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Storm Felix is set to affect central parts of the Mediterranean, bringing some rain, mountain snow and also strong winds. But further west, largely settled for the Canary Islands, Madeira, Portugal and also most of Spain. But towards the eastern coast, we could see some heavy showers here. The heaviest likely across Sicily and parts of Sardinia, and also likely to see some mountain snow across the highest parts of Italy and also Greece. Towards the weekend, though, largely settled and temperatures remaining around the same.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Tell us about the backlash situation, first of all.
Yeah, so the Duke and Duchess of Sussex visited a local food distribution centre, handing out food parcels to those who have been displaced or emergency service workers as well. And they happened to be captured by a local news crew. I think it was a Fox news crew. It's part of World Central Kitchen. That's a charity that they have supported for a number of years now, who've been doing this food distribution things. Whether or not it was a photo op, it's really unclear. I don't think we're ever going to get the answer to that. They didn't look like they were made up to look glam for the television. It looked genuine, but of course we know Meghan is an actress as well. So I'll let you make up your own mind on that one. But then we found out very late last night that the Duchess has asked Netflix to postpone her new lifestyle programme, and the Duchess has released a statement actually, and she says, "I'm thankful to my partners at Netflix for supporting me and delaying the launch as we focus on the needs of those impacted by the wildfires in my home state of California." She thinks it would be inappropriate to launch a glossy programme where she's in a $5 million mansion cooking food. It's an 8-part series, and hopefully by that time these fires will be well and truly extinguished.
Well, they're also getting criticism in the US as well from Jason Bateman's sister, that's the actor, saying that, talking about that photo opportunity that people are calling it, saying that Meghan Markle and Harry are no better than ambulance chasers, and they're disaster tourists.
It is difficult, isn't it, for Meghan and Harry trying to find their place in the world. Are they media, entertainment personalities, celebrities, and doing Netflix and all the rest of it, or are they going to be humanitarian workers like perhaps being members of the royal family would be? And I think at the moment they're kind of straddling those two different worlds, aren't they?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 10 to 5. Now, I've got some breaking news for you now, and it's this. And it's regarding the Israeli-Gaza conflict, with reports from the United States that a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. A ceasefire deal has been reached. The implementation of the agreement will be guaranteed by Qatar, Egypt and the United States. Of course, Egypt being key, as it will allow that southern route out of Gaza. To repeat that, breaking news just in. That's regarding the Israeli-Gaza conflict, with reports from the United States that a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. This, of course, just days before President-elect Donald Trump is sworn in. This outgoing last act by President Biden here. The implementation of the agreement will be guaranteed by Qatar, Egypt and the United States. Of course, we'll bring you more on that throughout the show as we get more detail. Now, moving on, the anger and frustration continues from farmers over the government's proposed changes to the inheritance tax, and one person who has labelled the move as brutal, anti-growth and short-sighted is the dairy farmer Ro Collingbourne, who joins us now. Ro, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have your company. I saw wonderful pictures of you, Ro, with your beautiful children, your grandchildren. In the newspaper, you work on the Brinkworth dairy farm, and very poignantly you said you should be looking forward now to retiring, to enjoying the fruits of your labour. Instead, you're thrust into an arena of huge stress. Tell us more.
Yeah, because we were expecting to be able to hand on the farm to our grandchildren and to my children first without any inheritance tax. And the reason that there isn't or wasn't any inheritance tax was precisely for this reason, so that farms could be handed on to the next generation. And this has clobbered it all. And my major point is that it's clobbered us smaller family farms rather than the very rich businessmen that you might be hoping to catch in the tax. Family farms, the values that we're being allowed are just too small. Everybody gets the first million if they're married, for their house and their gardens and own possessions. But if you take a fairly small farm like ours, 180 acres, that's the allowance for that is 1.2 million. And on top of that, there's all the cattle, all the machinery, all the buildings. It's easily going to go way over the 2 million that we're allowed on that. And it's going to put off the next generation coming into farming, because a dairy farm like ours, the incomes are so small, and there wouldn't be the money to pay this tax. So we're absolutely clobbered.
OK, Ro, we've got a quick 30 seconds. We know that politicians watch the show. What do you say to the Prime Minister if he was listening today?
Yep, you could easily solve this for our smaller family farms. Just raise that threshold to 5 million. And say that farmers over 75 can still continue with the nil rate, because they don't have time to know that they will live for 7 years. So it's really unfair on them. And that would save a lot of farms and save a lot of despair.
OK, well, Ro Collingbourne, I say this so often, if we have people like you in power, we might have half a fighting chance. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and the very, very best of British to you. Thank you very much, Ro Collingbourne. Now, plenty more to come in the next hour, including whether the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, is up to being the leader of the opposition to hold them to account. And, of course, more on that breaking news story of a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine in the Gaza area. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Business News Channel. Now's your weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this evening, it's going to remain quite dank and cloudy across the south, also some mist and fog developing and some patchy drizzle to the far northwest as a result of this frontal system just moving in here. But overall, high pressure largely dominating, which means it's a largely settled night to come. Lots of moisture trapped underneath this high though, which means quite cloudy conditions across parts of the south and southeast, quite murky at times, also likely to see further fog develop overnight. Even when we see these clearer skies, we could also see some patches of fog develop, also quite cloudy across the far north of Scotland where we're likely to see the bulk of the drizzle. But for many of us, a largely dry night, but it is going to be feeling chilly under those clearer skies. We may even see some pockets of frost by the morning. So to start on Thursday then across Scotland, as I say, lots of dry weather around, just a chance we could still see some patchy drizzle to the very far north, but largely dry across inland areas and feeling rather mild too, particularly in the northwest. Plenty of cloud across Northern Ireland, a few more clearer spells across northern parts of England, feeling chilly here, northern parts of Wales as well, some clear skies, possibly some pockets of frost, but across much of the south and southeast, fair amount of low clouds, some quite foggy conditions. Could also be quite slow to clear during the early hours of the morning, so do take care if you're travelling around. Through much of the day though, we will start to see some brighter weather, mainly across northern parts of Wales and northern parts of England. Across the south and southeast, it looks like that cloud is there to stay through much of the day, and also fairly cloudy across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Still fairly mild, but likely feeling cooler than it has done this afternoon. As we head into the evening, we'll see fairly similar conditions. Once again, a mix of cloud and clearer spells, turning chilly under those clearer skies, and we'll see a return of that rain and drizzle just start to creep into the west later on in the night. And as we head towards the weekend, still that cloud sticking around and temperatures really struggling, so feeling rather chilly at times too. Bye for now.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
In Manchester, the M61 is queuing northbound after a collision between Junction 1 for the M60 and Junction 2 for the A580. In Worcestershire, delays also on the M5 southbound after a collision between Junction 5 for Droitwich and Junction 6 for Worcester. In Oxfordshire, the M40 northbound is still partly blocked by a broken down vehicle between Junction 8A for Tame and Junction 9 for Bicester and the A34. In Buckinghamshire, the northbound M40 also partly blocked by a breakdown at Junction 4 for High Wycombe. And in Essex, the M25 is queuing clockwise after a breakdown just before Junction 26 for Waltham Abbey and the A121.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. That's tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this year. What would you spend it on? £50,000 could buy those treats you've always dreamed of having. And just one entry into the Great British Giveaway really could make £50,000 cash all yours. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome.
especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 5 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show here on GB News. We're broadcasting for you live from the heart of Westminster and all across Britain. On today's show, we've got some breaking news for you in this past few moments. It's regarding the Israel-Gaza conflict, with reports from the United States that a Gaza ceasefire deal has now been reached. The implementation of the agreement will be guaranteed by Qatar, Egypt and the United States. We'll have breaking news on this throughout the rest of the hour. Next story is Kemi up to it. Yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer's anti-corruption minister was forced to resign over corruption allegations. Yet, at PMQs today, Kemi Badenoch failed to nail Sir Keir Starmer. Instead, she attacks him on the economy on the day that inflation went down. My question is quite simple. Does Badenoch have the bite? Or do the Tories need a leader with more fangs? And next up, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer unveiled a £12 billion trade deal with Iraq that might finally allow us to deport illegal immigrants. But today, I'll be joined by a national security expert from Iraq who asks the simple question: why are we cooperating with a state that just passed a law making it legal for grown-up men in Iraq to marry 9-year-old girls? That's all coming up in your next hour. Welcome to the show. Always a pleasure to have your company. So huge breaking news there. A ceasefire deal has now been reached in the area between Gaza and Israel. That's just coming through in the last few moments. The United States has brokered that deal. That's coming through. The ceasefire has been reached. The implementation of the agreement will be guaranteed by Qatar, Egypt and the United States. This, of course, coming in the last few days of outgoing President Biden's presidency and just days before Donald Trump gets into office. We'll have full reaction and expert analysis on this breaking news story throughout the rest of the show. But first, here's your headlines, and it's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much indeed. 2 minutes past 5. Let's start then with a recap of that breaking news coming to us out of the Middle East this evening, that a ceasefire deal has been reportedly reached between Israel and Hamas, according to US officials and Arab mediators. That agreement, yet to be officially announced, we must add, involves a 6-week truce, the release of hostages held by Hamas and the release of Palestinian detainees by Israel in exchange. Mediators in Qatar, Egypt and the US will oversee the deal being implemented, which also includes plans for phased troop withdrawals and Gaza reconstruction efforts. We're expecting an official announcement in the coming hours, and we will, of course, keep across that for you, bring you that live as soon as it happens. We're also hearing that negotiations on a permanent ceasefire and the release of all remaining hostages are set to begin within 16 days of the implementation of that ceasefire deal. So that news just breaking in the last few minutes, that a Gaza ceasefire deal has reportedly been reached between Israel and Hamas. Well, turning now to news here at home, and Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch have clashed today over the economy at Prime Minister's questions. They traded blows over debt, tax hikes and leadership stability. Badenoch warned the UK is spending more on debt than schools and hospitals, accusing Labour's Chancellor of being unqualified and planning costly tax rises.
His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises this year?
Yeah. Well, in response, Sir Keir Starmer called the Conservatives economic vandals and blamed them for a £22 billion black hole and what he described as the worst cost of living crisis in living memory. The Prime Minister also defended his Chancellor Rachel Reeves, calling fiscal rules ironclad, but refused to rule out any March tax hikes amid the rising borrowing costs.
We had to deal with the £22 billion black hole that they left. The Chancellor will be in place for many, many years to come. She'll outstrip them. Mr. Speaker, if we all thought the politics was about cheap points, I could criticise their chancellors, but I don't have enough time to go through all of the chancellors that they had. We have one budget, that's what we're committed to, strong fiscal rules, and we'll stick to them, unlike the party opposite.
Well, in other news this afternoon, the Chagos deal, which is well known by many, I am sure, has been reportedly, Downing Street says, being reviewed by the United States President-elect Donald Trump before it moves forward. The agreement includes a 99-year lease for the joint UK-US airbase on Diego Garcia, but has sparked concerns over security ties with China. The Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel, though, has called the negotiations a complete humiliation, while Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch branded it a disastrous surrender of British territory. But the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has defended the plan, insisting it ensures the military base's future and addresses wrongs of the past, he said. And in other news today, do bear with me one moment while we bring up that correct story for you. But the Prime Minister says that every effort will be made to stop Gerry Adams receiving compensation for his detention during the Troubles. Sir Keir Starmer says repealing the Legacy Act, deemed unfit and unlawful by the courts, might lead to payouts for Mr Adams and others, sparking criticism from the Conservatives. Well, the Act blocks claims by over 400 people imprisoned in the 1970s, but Labour says a replacement is being drafted to balance victims' rights with legal obligations. If successful, Mr Adams could receive a six-figure sum for unlawful detention. The government is reviewing a controversial free speech law for universities. That's months after it was already paused over concerns about protecting hate speech. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, passed in 2023, gave universities a duty to promote free speech and allowed the regulator to fine institutions or student unions that failed to comply. Critics, though, including Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, paused the law last summer, warning it could expose universities to costly legal action. Now, a government source says the Act will be adjusted to balance academic freedom with a proper complaints process. And if you're just joining us tonight, let's bring you a recap of the breaking news coming to us from the Middle East that a ceasefire deal has reportedly been reached between Israel and Hamas. That is according to US officials and Arab mediators. The agreement, though yet to be officially announced, involves a 6-week truce, the release of hostages by Hamas, and in exchange the release of Palestinian detainees. We're also hearing a statement from the President-elect Donald Trump in the last few moments, who has said that we have secured a deal for the hostages in the Middle East to be released, adding, this is from Donald Trump, I say, they will be released shortly. So that news just in from the President-elect Donald Trump. Mediators in Qatar, Egypt and the US will oversee that deal, which at this stage we understand includes plans for a phased troop withdrawal and the reconstruction efforts in Gaza. When we hear official announcements expected later this evening, we will, of course, bring that to you. Well, those are the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Let's head straight back now to Martin for more on that news from the Middle East.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to news alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. And just to repeat that breaking news, if you're joining us, a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached in these last few minutes. And that's the Israel-Gaza conflict, with reports from the United States that a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. And the implementation of the agreement will be guaranteed by Qatar, by Egypt and the United States. And just to repeat that second breaking news line, in these past few moments, Donald Trump has issued a statement saying we have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. This, of course, coming just a few days after Donald Trump had threatened a severe escalation of the situation unless those hostages were released. Well, let's now cross to Colonel Richard Kemp for his expert analysis on this. Colonel Kemp, always a pleasure to have your company. You and I have been speaking about this since the conflict began. And very, very early on, Colonel Richard Kemp, we spoke about how a ceasefire may benefit Hamas. It may benefit them to regroup. Has this latest ceasefire, is it the right thing? Is it a good move? And will it ensure that Israel and the West gets the best outcome?
Well, I think the very good thing about a ceasefire, assuming it does actually happen, and from what we've heard of the potential terms of the ceasefire, and of course we don't know the detail yet, is that there will be a significant number of Israeli hostages released by Hamas. That's the intention. There's 94 people who were kidnapped 15 months ago, who have been tortured, sexually abused, in some cases raped, and in other cases murdered by Hamas in Gaza. And some of those will be released under this deal. So that can only be seen, I think, as good news. Of course, it potentially benefits Hamas as well, because it takes the pressure off them. They've had huge damage inflicted upon them by Israel since this war began. And they're currently fighting for their own survival. So there's good and bad to it. I think from what I understand of the likely terms of the deal, the IDF will remain in Gaza. They will continue to occupy the border between Gaza and Egypt, which is critical to starving Hamas of more weaponry and more resources they need, and also other critical areas of Gaza. But one thing I would say is I don't think we should see this as being the end of the conflict. It's going to be a temporary cessation, possibly developing into a full-scale end of the war, but probably, I think more likely it's going to be resumed at some point in the future. The second point I think that's worth noting is that this is not a Biden negotiated deal. This has been forced, I think, on Hamas by the threats of President Trump and President Trump imminently coming into the White House and their fears for what that might mean. And the other point, I think the final point I'd make, is that this also should be seen as part of a wider strategy in the Middle East. Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have been discussing the strategic plan for this conflict from the time Trump enters the White House. And I think we can see this as part of that strategy.
And Colonel Kemp, just for people listening on the radio, we are now having live pictures on our screen from Tel Aviv. People are hugging. There are pictures there of hostages being held aloft. Of course, this has been something we've seen since the beginning, since October the 7th, 2023 onwards. The pictures of those hostages, many still missing, a huge, huge issue. We seem to be approaching some form of endgame. As you say, Colonel Kemp, we have no idea how many of those 94 hostages still detained will make it out, what kind of state they'll be in. Those human stories will unroll over the coming days, no doubt. But back to that point you made there about the politics. Isn't it interesting, Colonel Kemp, how all along Donald Trump said, I'll have this war over within a week? Well, it's happened before he's even got in power. Talk us through the political leverage, the political menace, the political unpredictability you think Donald Trump has brought to this, and how you believe that that's escalated the ending of this conflict.
Yeah, I think one of the great strengths that Trump has got, whether you like him or don't, I think most people will accept he's very unpredictable. No one knows what he's going to do. throughout this conflict, President Biden has been applying, although the US have given a great deal of support to Israel, they've also been applying a restraining hand on what Israel can and cannot do in relation to Gaza, in relation to Lebanon, and crucially, I think, in relation to Iran. And now I think the likelihood is those gloves are going to come off. And as I said, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump will certainly have been discussing this and coming to a conclusion about how the war will be conducted after Trump gets into the White House. And I think one of the fears is going to be that one of the fears from the enemy's perspective is that he will probably give diplomatic cover, possibly military support indirectly to Israel for a major strike against Iran. And of course, Hamas being not exactly a proxy, but something close to a proxy of Iran, and certainly sponsored by Iran and funded and supported by Iran, Hamas will no doubt be, to an extent at least, influenced by what Trump might do to Iran and the directions that are being received, as much as they are, from Iran to Hamas about what they should be doing now. I think there's going to be immense fear in Tehran about Trump coming into the White House.
And Colonel Kemp, I know you're supremely well connected in the Israeli army area, the intelligence and the governance area. What a difference this will make. The Biden administration was dallying, was it not, all the time with a ceasefire that seemed to benefit Hamas, the threats of withdrawing armaments, playing the liberal politics side. All of a sudden, the drums are very, very different. And we've seen this dramatic breakthrough. It's incredible. What's the reaction from the Israelis you've been speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget also that it's not just President Trump's sort of vision behind the scenes. He's also had his Middle East envoy designate directly involved in the negotiations. And of course, that's a new development we haven't seen before. We've seen months of negotiations over potential ceasefires. Each time Israel has shown willing to have a ceasefire, and each time Hamas have refused to do it. That's now changed, as you say, as a result of a change in the political situation. I think there's going to be mixed feelings among Israelis, certainly the ones I've spoken to. Of course, there could well be significant upsides to this apart from the release of some of the hostages. And one of the upsides, as I mentioned, is the potential free hand that President Trump will give to the Israelis, and that's welcomed, I think, by most Israelis. But there's downsides to it as well. And one of the downsides is that part of the deal undoubtedly is going to involve releasing probably a significant number of Hamas terrorists who are held prisoner inside Israel. And that will be part of it, and probably more Hamas terrorists who have been carrying out murders and other criminal activity. More will be released than hostages released. So that's a downside. And of course, the other downside, which people are fearful about, is that Hamas is not totally destroyed. Hamas still has some capability. Most of their military infrastructure has been written down or completely taken out, but they have been recruiting more forces to their cause. Those people will not be able to, in my view, will not be able to do significant damage to Israel along the sort of 7th of October lines, but they still have the ability to exercise control over the population of Gaza. And that's therefore a situation which cannot be allowed to continue. Whatever the outcome of the ceasefire, Hamas cannot still be allowed to have control, as it does to a large extent now inside Gaza, of the civilian population. So a big concern and a problem that's got to be dealt with at some point.
Colonel Kemp, I'm joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. He has a question for you.
Yeah, Colonel Kemp, Chris Hope here for GB News in the studio with Martin. Last Tuesday, Donald Trump said this: if those hostages are not back by the inauguration, all hell will break out. He said that twice in that extraordinary press conference from Mar-a-Lago. Do you think that was part of a kind of a targeted diplomatic offensive by Trump to get this sorted out by the time he gets into the White House? And should we be saying this is the first win of the Trump second term?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. He said that, as you say, he said that same thing pretty much twice. And it was intended to intimidate, which it seems to have done. And not just, as I mentioned before, not just to intimidate Hamas, because they don't know what Trump will do. Trump is so unpredictable. But also, I think, maybe even more significantly, to intimidate their masters in Tehran, the Iranian Ayatollahs, who have been so badly weakened by the immense destruction of Hamas, the destruction to a large extent also of Hezbollah, the loss of Syria, which was a key territory for them, as well as Israeli strikes, recent Israeli strikes against Iran. So the Iranians have been badly weakened, and they will fear Trump coming in. And those words, all hell will break loose, they will probably think that will be applied as much to them as it could be applied to Hamas inside Gaza.
Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you for joining us on today's show on this historic moment. The Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. And Colonel Kemp, thank you for joining us throughout this entire conflict since the past October the 7th. Your expertise is very, very much appreciated. Thank you for joining us today on GB News. Now, just a reminder to those joining us, ceasefire deal has been reached, and we had some live pictures on our screen there, both from Tel Aviv, inside Israel, scenes of jubilation and also of immense relief, people holding placards of hostages still held. As Colonel Kemp said there are 94 hostages still in captivity. We do not know the situation with them. We don't know if they're alive, if their health situation, what that's like. And we also have scenes there from Gaza, also celebrations there. The war is over. Now, back to the studio now. I'm joined by Chris Hope, our political editor, and Paul Richards, former Labour advisor. Chris, you're pointing at your phone. You've got a breaking news line for us?
Yeah, reports now. Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, we're told. These are all women, soldiers and civilians, children and men over 50. Israel's government will vote tomorrow on this ceasefire deal. The question is, what is the price for this?
So 33 hostages released there. Colonel Kemp there said 94, so 61 still at large.
That's the reporting, of course, and we'll wait and see exactly where it takes us from there.
And just to repeat there, you can see scenes of jubilation from the streets of Tel Aviv. And again, I repeat, placards of hostages still at large, being held up, presumably by relatives there. So scenes of jubilation, but also scenes of intense foreboding about what may be. Paul Richards, you were listening in throughout all of that. You were shaking your head somewhat at the fact that this could be seen as the first major victory for Donald Trump before he's even in power.
Well, first of all, I think the jubilation may be a little early. The Hamas technique or their Hamas strategy is always to keep these hostages as bargaining chips. They're not going to release all of the hostages all at once. And as we've already heard, they're looking to maintain a large group of people still in captivity, most of whom are civilians, and they were just going about their business on the 7th of October, and they're going to be kept in those terrible conditions that we know about. So let's not get too excited. Now, in terms of who takes credit for this, of course, this is where the spin, the PR kicks in. Donald Trump is, of course, going to try and take credit for this. So will Joe Biden. I would say, though, that the deal has been brokered by honest brokers in the Middle East itself, so the negotiators are going to be drawn from those Arab countries that can actually have access to both sides as well. So we'll be, if it comes off, and I think it's a very fragile thing right now, but if it does come off, and if there is a settlement and peace, I think it will be the work of many hands, and it would be wrong just to say this was Donald Trump's doing.
Do you think, though, again, it's very, very early days, and as you say, 33 to be released, this is being brokered by Hamas. I mean, how much credence can we place in what they say? They are actually a prescribed terrorist organisation, so let's not get too ahead of ourselves there. You're absolutely right to have that note of caution, Paul Richards, of course. Do you think, though, when we look back over this, we will be able to conclude that perhaps the political left got this wrong? And what I mean by that is Donald Trump, as Colonel Kemp there, here's a guy, Colonel Kemp, who was the supreme commander of the British Armed Forces. He knows the area, he works in the area, he knows the Israeli Defence Forces very, very well. He understands the force, the unpredictability, the foreboding sense of somebody like Donald Trump coming into power. And by the way, that might also have echoes of what we see rolling out in Ukraine. But back to this area, that unpredictability, it worked with Kim Jong-un before, it whipped him into shape. And meanwhile, the political left seemed to be much more anti-Israel. Is that fair to say?
Well, sections of it are, but the majority of it isn't. And I think most people on the left in politics would see the right of self-determination applying to everyone equally, including Israel. They would see that Israel has a right to defend itself. They would consider Israel is a legitimate state. And there are, loud sections that don't agree with those things. But so I wouldn't tar the entire left with that particular brush, to be honest. I think Trump's sort of genius is this unpredictability, his ability to shake things up. But the fact that it's just a transition from one administration to another administration does give the world this moment of flux, this sort of fulcrum in our politics. And you do often see that kind of thing breaking the logjam. And I'm old enough to remember the hostage release in Iran when Carter gave way to Reagan. And that similar situation meant that suddenly things started to happen that have been bogged down for weeks. So it's a moment where things can happen because one president gives way to another. But let's not see it entirely through this Western lens. Like I say, there are actors locally and in the region that have put a lot of hours into this deal.
But it's fair to say, though, that the Labour Party, again, just going back to pictures on your screen there, Tel Aviv, again, very, very much mixed emotions. On the one hand, it must be a huge, huge sense of relief. I mean, just this morning, Chris Hope, we were seeing a huge number of air raid sirens across Tel Aviv. There were still threats of bombardment coming in this morning. And now, dramatic news, the ceasefire deal has been reached.
The small print matters so much. We know about women and children, men over 50. We don't know about other people. And Paul was saying it's important not to equate the two things. These are civilian hostages. In return, you might see...
And some of these people were actually on kibbutz, trying to get a sort of Arab-Israeli understanding. They were on the left,
having any equivalence in the hostages is not right.
OK, we can now go live to Tel Aviv. We have a reporter on the ground, and his name is Tal Hagen. He's there in Tel Aviv for us. Tal Hagen, welcome to GB News. There are astonishing scenes on our screens of what's happening there. You're actually there. Tell us about the mood on the ground to this historic announcement.
No, I'm not looking at the mood on the ground, actually, what is happening in regard to the protests. I'm more looking about the online media space. Because a big portion of the way in which we are receiving our information about the current situation is through media. And as you guys spoke about earlier, at the current moment, we actually haven't heard anything official, like as in the Israeli Prime Minister, the representatives of Hamas and Qatar have not come out publicly and stated the terms of the deal, what exactly is going to come forward. Everything we have so far is through unknown sources, people who are allegedly high up in the process for the ceasefire, and we are going to have to truly, hold our patience. And while people really want to rush to discuss not just the terms of the ceasefire, but also how it might affect us later on, we need to be patient and understand that the flow of information right now is very, very unpredictable regarding what is actually true and what is false.
And Tel Hagen, one of the landscapes of this conflict since the very, very beginning has been the reliability of data, particularly data perhaps coming out from Hamas itself in terms of casualties and propaganda throughout the war, perhaps some may say on both sides. And you're correct to say, of course, we have a paucity of data. 33 hostages we're hearing may be released, but again, when will we know, do you think, something more concrete? Are we expecting, for example, a statement from Benjamin Netanyahu?
So what we know right now in regards to the media reports is that tonight the Prime Minister of Qatar is supposed to make some type of announcement regarding the deal. Tomorrow morning, you also mentioned about the Knesset actually voting on the deal. So most likely it'll happen regarding the Israeli Prime Minister will likely speak tomorrow. But as you said, regarding different types of mis and disinformation that have been prevalent during this time. So we at Fake Reporter, the organization that I work at, something that we showcased just not long ago was how in the previous ceasefire deal, on November 21st, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is the second largest militant group in Gaza, they announced that one of the hostages, Hana Katzir, had been killed by an Israeli bombardment. And then a few days later, she was released in the deal. And so we need to be very, very careful about what information we believe coming out right now, because there could be talks about hostages that have actually been killed or hostages that are alive. And then on the day of realization, when these people are released, either dead or alive, suddenly we will have thought, like, how could they have lied to us? But the problem is that we need to be careful about the information that we take in right now.
Well, thank you for joining us. And that's researcher Tal Hagen, live there from Tel Aviv. And just to bring you up to speed, there's another breaking news line from Donald Trump. He's just issued a statement. Donald Trump says that he will work with Israel and allies to make sure that Gaza never becomes a terrorist safe haven. Of course, that was one of the sentiments there echoed by Colonel Richard Kemp. An early ceasefire, he said, from the very, very beginning would have empowered Hamas to regroup and perhaps to become more powerful. Donald Trump saying he will work with Israel and allies to make sure that Gaza never becomes a terrorist safe haven. I'm delighted to now announce I'm joined by my next guest, and that's the former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkind. Sir Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Monumental breaking news line today. What's your reaction to this historic announcement?
Well, like everyone else, I am, of course, delighted that this has happened. It is sad that it didn't happen months ago. It should have happened months ago, but we needn't go into that today. It's still, of course, uncertain how many hostages will be released live, because you cannot just take on board as true some of the claims that have been made. But the families will find out very soon what has happened to the hostages. Let us hope that most of them will be in reasonable shape.
And so, Malcolm, how much do you think an impact Donald Trump's statement we were talking about there, saying hellfire would rain down on the area, strong on the rhetoric? Donald Trump's claiming this already as an early foreign policy victory. It's not even empowered. Do you think that notion carries any merit?
Well, I think his personality carries some weight. The reality, of course, is that his views on this matter are not that different to Joe Biden's, the current president. So there's not a change of policy involved. But they do realize that he is somebody who will make all sorts of threats as to what will happen if something is not done in the way he likes. And just occasionally he will try to carry out these threats. So that, I've no doubt, will have helped bring this to a head at this particular moment, rather than leaving it to the uncertainties that would follow if it had not been achieved by the time that he formally becomes president. There is another point I think worth making at this stage. We will have to see in the next 24 hours what the consequences are of this deal for the continuation of the current Israeli government, because two of its most prominent extreme right members, Gvir and Smotrich, have been bitterly opposing this deal. They have threatened to resign if their views are not accepted. It appears their views have been rejected. And if that is the case, were they just bluffing, or will they leave the government? If they leave the government, that not only will weaken Netanyahu's strength, but it also will make it possible to contemplate further changes in a more sensible direction as to how Israeli-Palestinian relations should be dealt with over the weeks and months ahead.
And so, Malcolm, Colonel Richard Kemp was saying a short while ago, I don't know if you heard him, but now he was saying that Iran will be very concerned about this because Donald Trump has made it clear that he will assist Israel and her allies moving forward. And, of course, all eyes fall on Iran, who, of course, has been pulling the levers of Hezbollah and Hamas throughout this. Do you think, I mean, this conflict was raging throughout your entire time as Foreign Secretary? Crikey, it's been going on since I've been a boy. Do you think something is different this time?
It's been a very long-standing conflict, but let's be under no illusions. The last year, since October the 7th of the year before, has been much more traumatic than almost any other period in Israeli-Palestinian relations. You mentioned about the Iranians. Of course, the last few months have been disastrous for them. They thought they had an axis of resistance whereby other people would attack Israel on their behalf. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Russians would help them, and so forth. And it's been a complete disaster. As one door closes, another slams in their face. And the ceasefire today clearly is something which does not help Iran. Far from it. It makes it more abundant than ever that Iran's malevolent objectives to try and destroy the state of Israel has infinitely less chance of succeeding now than it's even had in the last 10 years, which were not very high even during that period.
And so, Malcolm, might this be the moment strategically? There's been so much talk for so many years about trying to neutralise or remove Iran's nuclear capability, which, of course, is the huge cloud on the horizon, this continuum of terror across the Middle East. Do you think this might be the moment that Donald Trump thinks, OK, ceasefire between Gaza and Israel? Why not go the full Monty? Why not try and totally disable the Ayatollahs at this moment?
Well, it depends what you mean by that. If you mean, is it likely America will launch some massive air attack on Iran? No, I think that's very, very unlikely. But what is much more possible is the resumption of a dialogue, direct or indirect, between Iran and the United States. Iran is suffering very, very heavily economically from the sanctions that have been imposed. Its economy is in a complete mess. And of course, the Iranian government is losing constantly the support of its own people, who say, why is our economy and our standard of living being destroyed? Because of a dispute with Israel, which doesn't interest most of us, and because of foolish designs to develop nuclear weapons, which will invite attack from the United States. So I think the fact that there is a new president of Iran, and that suggests that the Ayatollah, who is the supreme leader, who takes all the decisions, he's been willing to allow that president to explore the possibility of a new dialogue with the United States, and that might very well now start happening. But it will be a very, very slow process. But it means that Iran will be negotiating from a much, much weaker position than it's been in previous negotiations, and it will be negotiating with a president, in the case of Trump, who is just at the beginning of his term of office, and we all know his style is belligerent, to say the least. So it'll be interesting to see how that does develop.
And so, Malcolm, do you think this could be something which many, many people around the globe would just be very, very grateful for? And that is the beginning of getting on a front foot against this virulent, poisonous branch of Islamism? Could ratcheting down on Iran, taking out Hezbollah, removing Hamas's ability, Donald Trump there stating he would never allow Gaza to become a safe haven for terrorists. Might we see this as a new movement to push back on Islamism globally?
Well, being realistic, you have to make a distinction between Islamism as a concept, as a belief. Very difficult to eradicate that. But the threat of Islamism is not just that belief, it's whether they can translate that into political and military activity to destabilize the whole region and damage the rest of the world. And we have seen, not just with the destruction of Islamic State by the international coalition several years ago, but also by the actions in the last few weeks and months, which have virtually destroyed Hamas, which have deeply weakened Hezbollah, not just to their ability to attack Israel, but what we are seeing in Lebanon now is that the rest of Lebanon, which does not support Hezbollah, is becoming much more powerful. Hezbollah is seen to be a weakening force. And, for example, the Lebanese have now chosen a new president and a new prime minister who were not the people who Hezbollah wanted in Lebanon. So that shows that they, as a political force, are weakening as well. So this is all part of a wider process. It won't come to a sudden end. But what we are seeing is perhaps an opportunity for Israel and the Palestinians to begin the possibility of a new dialogue. Now, this is where Trump could be very, very important. Trump likes to take the credit. He's entitled to take some of the credit for what were known as the Abrahamic Accords. At the end of his last presidency, when several Arab states, in particular the United Arab Emirates, but 2 or 3 others, established diplomatic relations with Israel. First thing they'd ever done since 1948. And these have not been revoked despite the conflict of the last 12 months. Now, Trump's main ambition, and what the Israelis would positively welcome, would be if Saudi Arabia could be persuaded to join that new dispensation. The Saudis have actually said they are potentially willing to recognize the state of Israel and have peace with Israel, but only if Israel shows that it's willing, however slowly, to move towards some form of two-state solution where the Palestinians have their own state. Up till now, Netanyahu has in effect rejected that. With Trump in the White House, it is quite possible that will mean very, very serious pressure on Netanyahu to reconsider that view, or if there's a general election in Israel, which will happen in the not-too-distant future, any new Israeli government, which might not include Netanyahu, might also be willing to make a fresh start. And that would be very, very encouraging indeed.
Thank you very much for your expertise on this, and that's the former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, of course, has been looking over the Middle East many, many decades. Thank you for imparting your wisdom on the show today. And let's come back to the studio now. I'm joined by Chris Hoban. I've also been joined by Baroness Kate Hoey. Live pictures on your screen now from Tel Aviv. On your right there, if you're watching on the radio, there are fireworks being held in the air. There are many, many placards being held in the air with the faces of hostages on them. Some sparse information coming out. Chris Hope will have a quick update for us shortly. 33 hostages are apparently announced being released. Colonel Richard Kemp did announce to us, though, that 94 hostages are still presently at large. So a huge amount of conversation there. Chris Hope got live pictures there. That is Tel Aviv on your right with flares being held aloft, the faces of hostages still at large. And on the left there, we have live pictures from Gaza, scenes of jubilation there, people dancing in the streets. They seem more jubilant in Gaza than in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv more sombre, of course, because they're still awaiting the return of those hostages. Let's come back to the studio now and get some breaking news. You've got some more information for us, Chris Hope.
Yes, Martin. What we know so far, then, we think 33 Israeli hostages, including all women, soldiers and civilian children, and men over 50 to be released. The Israeli parliament tomorrow will vote on this deal. Israel and Hamas have reached a ceasefire agreement. Already the political reaction is coming in. Donald Trump, who takes over as the US president next Tuesday, he is saying this epic ceasefire agreement could only have happened as a result of our historic victory in November. As a signal to the entire world, he says that his administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. He is thrilled, he says, that American and Israeli hostages will be returning home to be united with their families and loved ones. That comes 8 days after Donald Trump did say twice in that press conference last Tuesday in Mar-a-Lago, if those hostages are knocked back by the inauguration, all hell will break out. That threat appears to have come to some fruition. Ed Davey is the first UK politician to react to this. He says this is incumbent on the UK and the entire international community to do all it can to ensure that this ceasefire does not turn out to be a temporary truce. Otherwise, we will not be able to get the remaining hostages home and finally alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So far, just the Lib Dem leader responding or waiting on Labour and the Tory party.
Let's bring in Baroness Kate Hoey now. Baroness Kate Hoey, thank you very much for joining us, coming over from the House of Lords to be with us. Thank you very much. That's appreciated. What's your immediate reaction to this historic news?
Well, my immediate reaction is this is the first victory for Donald Trump in terms of what he has achieved. And as I was originally going to come in and talk about the Chagos Islands, I'm hoping that now he will grasp that nettle and stop the ridiculous government measure. But clearly, this is historic. But the detail will matter, and whether all those hostages are released is going to be very, very important, because I imagine some of those 90-odd may well be dead. And I think the Israeli government tomorrow in their parliament are going to have it'll not rush through. I think they will have some opposition. But clearly, what has gone on has been shocking. So many people killed. Everyone must welcome this. But it's in the detail of what's going to happen afterwards, how you get reconciliation.
Baroness Hoey, I think that mood actually is reflected on the pictures we can see now on our screens. There. On the right of your screens, that's Tel Aviv. And as I keep saying, those are the placards being held aloft. Those are presumably the photos, the faces, Baroness Hoey, of those loved ones who are still at large, still held hostage by Hamas. People there will not know if their loved ones are alive or what kind of physical state they are in. And as we said there, 94 hostages still unaccounted for. 33 may be released. Well, that's 61 that people will not know their fate, their destiny. And that perhaps explains, Baroness Hoey, a more muted mood there to this news.
Well, they have waited a very long time, and they've had very, very little hope, really, until quite recently, when it did look like there might be some kind of peace agreement. But I think there's going to be, I don't know, but I think there will probably be some very disappointed families there. And I can understand why tonight they are not jumping up and down, because until they find their family member with them, they're getting released. They're not going to think that actually means anything.
When we spoke to Colonel Richard Kemp earlier, he's been active in the area. He works closely with the intelligence forces in Israel. He's commented on this since the very, very beginning. And one thing he said all along, which has just been echoed by Donald Trump, it's vital that's Gaza, cannot become a safe haven for terrorists. So a ceasefire should not and cannot allow
that's the danger.
Hamas to regroup.
That's the danger, that Hamas will now use this. A ceasefire for them was more urgent, really, and that they will use this as a regrouping, and we will see a kind of, returning of what had happened before. I mean, Gaza is going to need huge amounts of support in terms of getting it reconstructed, but there's no point if Hamas are going to take over. There has to be some form of independent elections if they're going to have a Palestinian Authority in Gaza.
Can I ask you about that point about Donald Trump will be claiming this as a victory? You mentioned, of course, the Chagos Islands, and Ukraine has also been talked about. One thing we often talk about is his unpredictability, part of his character. Do you think we might start to see now something of a new world order where, mercifully, these conflicts might start drawing to an end?
Well, I think what this has shown, and what he will probably show with the Chagos Islands and indeed with Ukraine, he means business. When he says something, he means it. I mean, I haven't had many examples of when he's changed his mind completely. And therefore, I think world leaders generally, including our own Prime Minister, should actually recognise that things have changed, and that means that we have to change our attitude to Trump. And when you look at all those numbers of Labour cabinet ministers who were appallingly said some dreadful things about Trump when some of us were trying to be more reasonable and not interfere in what was happening there, I think it's going to be a very interesting time. I mean, that sounds very, very banal, but it's going to be a very interesting time.
You'll bear with us. I'm joined by another guest now, and that's the foreign correspondent at Unheard, and that's David Patrikarakos. David, welcome to the show. What's your first reaction to this historic news?
Well, that it is indeed historic. It's extraordinary. What's striking as well is the time. This is very, very reminiscent of the hostage deal that Reagan made. If you remember, hostages were taken in Iran, American hostages, under Jimmy Carter. He couldn't get them out. There was a failed rescue attempt, in fact, when the American helicopter crashed in the desert. And then they were released just as Reagan took power. So it is historic. Donald Trump said that unless they are returned, there will be, severe consequences. And right now, it seems that he has done what he said he would do. Extraordinary for a politician.
David, do you think then, David, a lot of people from the political left globally were ridiculing Donald Trump when he said, I can end these wars quickly, I'll have Ukraine over in 24 hours. He's not even in office, and this one has ended. And undeniably, his volatility and his ability to get things done. He was resolute, saying he would do everything he could to arm Israel, to assist Israel, not just in Gaza, but also in Iran. Do you think we might be seeing now a new era of strongman presidency, which hopefully might bring back some peace across this area?
Well, look, there's a few points there. First of all, I think we're definitely in the era. I'm not sure that this, has ended. I think that when it comes to Gaza, what we have to understand is that Israel smashed Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria fell. So it won. It really did win in the field. And it really put Hamas in a position where it had little other choice. I think Ukraine is harder. The Ukrainians are not defeated. The Russians are not victorious. The Russians are not defeated. The Ukrainians are not victorious. I think there's severe structural issues here, but this is certainly an improvement on what we've seen over the last year and a half, 2-3 years. I mean, I've been reporting on Ukraine for 10 years, and the Ukrainians used to say to me, look, we're very grateful for all the help, but why do you always give us 70% of what we need 3 months after we need it? I think with Ukraine, you either needed to back them properly or tell them to surrender. So we had this sort of three-quarters-arsed situation in which we found ourselves. It seems that Trump, whatever he is not, wishy-washy like that. As you say, he says something, he makes a decision, he seems to stick to it. We are most certainly in a new era, and let's be honest, right now, even before he's in power, it started very well.
And David, I had Sir Malcolm Rifkind, of course, the legendary, the talismanic Foreign Secretary during the Thatcher years on the show, and I asked him, is this the moment, an opportune moment, perhaps, to strike at the Ayatollahs, if not militarily, then politically? The cancer across the area has been Iran. The Ayatollahs arming, poisoning, Hezbollah, Hamas. Do you think it would be an opportune moment to try and deal with Iran?
Look, I think that's happening already. I mean, what can we actually do? Military action, I think the Americans don't want to do it. But look, just keep doing what they're doing. The Iranians have spent billions on foreign adventurism. Their people are already unhappy, and now they've seen it all for nothing. The Iranian regime is more popular than any time since the coming of the Islamic Revolution in 1979. It's discredited, it's broke. Ayatollah Khamenei is finally dying. So look, I say with the Ayatollah, same as Putin, they're on the back foot. Keep up the pressure, don't appease, keep pushing forward, and let's hope that Donald Trump is the man to do this.
And just quickly about Ukraine, I know this is the historic moment here in Gaza, but no, all eyes now. Donald Trump did say, you know, next will be Ukraine. I'll have that war solved in 24 hours. As you said there, you've been reporting on this for 10 years. Are you confident that that conflict can also hopefully be brought to a swift resolution?
Less so, because I think any ceasefire or negotiation that Putin has, he uses to rearm. So does Hamas, but Hamas, as I say, is completely destroyed for the moment. Putin is not. Look, I hope that there's some kind of a resolution. We all do, as long as it doesn't involve throwing Ukraine under the bus, because that is bad, not just for Ukraine, but for all of the West, and that we cannot have.
Thank you very much for joining us, and that's the foreign correspondent at Unheard, David Patrick Aragos. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm joined by my next guest now, and that's the national security and foreign policy researcher, Khaled Hassan. Khaled, welcome to the show. You originally going to be joining me earlier on about the trade deal that we've just done with Iraq, but the news has moved swiftly onwards. Can I ask you about the broader situation in the Middle East? Do you think it might be an ideal time now to strike towards Iran? And what might that mean for the return of a more moderate political landscape across the broader Middle East, including your country, Iraq?
Yes, it's very interesting, actually, because I think that President Trump wants to expand the Abraham Accords, and we know this, and we have been essentially engaging with people in his administration to expand the Abraham Accords. But I have to admit, as a council member of President Herzog's Voice of the People initiative, I am always engaging with Israelis, and I think there is really serious division in Israel around what happens now in terms of Hamas's survival. This is the key question now. If this deal means that Hamas survives, then there is really little hope for peace within, at least within Israel and around Israel, essentially, because that's the main concern. But for peace largely across the region, we're very hopeful. I think definitely Iran is likely to be the target of some form of military action by the US. That's more likely than not. But for me, this deal is concerning, to be honest. It's really quite emotional today, especially when you look at the number of hostages who are expected to be delivered alive. It's really quite concerning and really quite disheartening, I have to admit.
And Khaled Hassan, I think that sentiment is very much reflected there in those live pictures from Tel Aviv. Much more sombre attitude, as you say. We've only heard of an announcement of 33 hostages perhaps will be released, and 94, we understand, are still unaccounted for. That's a discrepancy of 61. That's a huge amount of concern for the friends, loved ones, families within Israel. Thank you very much for joining us, Khaled Hassan. Let's come back now to the studio for a quick final reaction from Chris Hope and Baroness Kate Hoey. Chris Hope, let's come to you. Any more breaking news lines coming through as we speak?
Nothing yet. We're waiting for a Qatari press conference tonight on the ceasefire announcement. They've brokered the deal. Yeah. Again, we are waiting for comments from both Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, and of course Keir Starmer, the Premier, and that will come later tonight. And as soon as we get those, we'll bring them to our view straight away.
And Baroness Kate Hoey, of course, as we reflect on the ceasefire in Gaza, you also have a particular interest in the Chagos Islands. You came and talked to us about that. And again, this goes back to Donald Trump and the fact you're very concerned about the perceived surrender of that territory.
And we wrote a letter, a large number of us wrote a letter, which was sent to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary last night, urging them not to go ahead with any kind of deal 3-4 days before we're going to have a new president, who I believe will not look on what the United Kingdom's trying to do very favourably. So hopefully, I think from what I've heard today, there hasn't been anything signed up yet. I mean, it's quite outrageous. Mauritius has no more claim over the Chagos Islands than, Scotland has. I mean, it really is ridiculous. And what this is doing for our international reputation and for security in terms of China's involvement with Mauritius, it's just crazy. I mean, no one really seems to understand why this was pushed through so quickly. soon after they took power.
Do you think Trump will torpedo it, the deal?
I hope so.
Chris?
I'm looking again at the line here from Donald Trump. He says this epic ceasefire, he says, agreement could only have happened as a result of his victory. And he goes on to say this, as it signals to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals, plural, to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. Deals, plural. Sure. This is the first deal in a series. I wonder whether vetoing Chagos may happen now, and also on Ukraine. What deal will we negotiate there? This is the beginning of a deal-making president taking over next Tuesday in the White House. It's a big moment.
Next Monday.
Next Monday.
I'm going out, so I'm looking forward to being able to contribute.
Starts work on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And the new era of strong armed politics on the world stage, and historic ceasefire announced on the show today between Gaza and Israel. Thank you for joining us on the show. Thank you for Baroness Kate Hoey and Chris Hope for joining me in the studio. We'll, of course, continue the conversation. Next up is Jubes & Co. Thank you for your company, and we'll see you soon. Here's your weather. Thank you.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we head into this evening, it's going to remain quite dank and cloudy across the south, also some mist and fog developing, and some patchy drizzle to the far northwest as a result of this frontal system just moving in here. But overall, high pressure largely dominating, which means it's a largely settled night to come. Lots of moisture trapped underneath this high, though, which means quite cloudy conditions across parts of the south and southeast, quite murky at times, also likely to see further fog develop overnight. Even when we see these clearer skies, we could also see some patches of fog develop, also quite cloudy across the far north of Scotland, where we're likely to see the bulk of the drizzle. But for many of us, a largely dry night, but it is going to be feeling chilly under those clearer skies. We may even see some pockets of frost by the morning. So to start on Thursday then across Scotland, as I say, lots of dry weather around, just a chance we could still see some patchy drizzle to the very far north, but largely dry across inland areas and feeling rather mild too, particularly in the northwest. Plenty of cloud across Northern Ireland, a few more clearer spells across northern parts of England, feeling chilly here, northern parts of Wales as well, some clear skies, possibly some pockets of frost, but across much of the south and southeast, fair amount of low clouds, some quite foggy conditions. Could also be quite slow to clear during the early hours of the morning, so do take care if you're travelling around. Through much of the day, though, we will start to see some brighter weather, mainly across northern parts of Wales and northern parts of England. Across the south and southeast, it looks like that cloud is there to stay through much of the day, and also fairly cloudy across Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Still fairly mild, but likely feeling cooler than it has done this afternoon. As we head into the evening, we'll see fairly similar conditions. Once again, a mix of cloud and clearer spells, turning chilly under those clearer skies, and we'll see a return of that rain and drizzle just start to creep into the west later on in the night. And as we head towards the weekend, still that cloud sticking around and temperatures really struggling, so feeling rather chilly at times too. Bye for now.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan and I won £30,000 with the Great British Giveaway. I'd say to people who want to enter or are wondering whether to enter to do it, it happens to people like me.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries